What's the most unhinged gift that you've ever pretended to love? My parents found the Amazon wish list of someone with the same name as me, but not me. Thought it had a bunch of weird items, but decided to not check in with me or any other family member to see if they had the right list. And that's how I, as a 24-year-old male, got a maternity body pillow for Christmas. The same crock pot 3 years in a row from my ex-husband's mother. His new wife was gifted one last year. I'm certain that this woman has a pallet of crock pots stashed somewhere in her house. Once, when I was 18, my great-aunt found out I liked cats, so for Christmas she got me a clip-on tail with matching ears. A girl I went to high school with and ended up taking college classes with wore them all throughout college. The class was on effective public speaking, and we had to write a paper and do a presentation on persuasion. We'd choose any topic to persuade someone into trying said topic. Her choice was on why you should be a furry. Maybe your aunt thought you were into that? My brother, maybe 11 at the time, took the wrapping paper off his gift from our grandmother. It was in a tape dispenser box, and cue everyone laughing. Oh, you got a tape dispenser. We got pretty quiet when it turned out to be a tape dispenser. Ooh. Lesbian Christmas. My parents thought I was a lesbian and wanted to be supportive. They gave me pink triangle earrings and poetry books by lesbians. I'm not gay. The very first holiday after my wedding, my mother-in-law sends my wife and I, each separately, the same self-help book on how to survive living with a hostile spouse. Not how to divorce or anything, but how to live in the relationship with an awful, bullying significant other. Not just to her, not just to me, to both of us. 2 copies of the same book. My sister bought me a CD she really wanted for herself. When I opened it, she said, "If you don't like it, I'll just take it." I didn't like it, but I kept it. Screw her. That is the sibling pettiness that most of us can relate to. I don't want it, but I'm going to keep it so that you don't get to enjoy it. But I'm not saying your sister didn't have that coming. Most of us really are just the worst at that age. I was a step-grandchild, and my grandmother sold Avon to feed her QVC addiction. So while the other 6 grandchildren got real leather jackets, diamond jewelry, motocross lessons, and one year an actual motocross bike, I got plastic Avon jewelry. For reasons too long to list here, I got placed with my grandparents 2 weeks before Christmas when I was 16. I watched everyone open up their gifts, and then one aunt gave me a Walmart bag with some socks in it. Another one told me I should be grateful that the family was taking me in instead of leaving me on the street, and that was my present. 7 aunts and uncles and their spouses, along with my grandparents, and that's how they treated me in a situation that was out of my control. Needless to say, I don't talk to my family anymore. I used to be a little standoffish at work because I'm shy, sitting on my phone instead of socializing with coworkers. For the Secret Santa, I got my guy a nice bottle of bourbon because I knew that was something he'd like. I, in turn, got a book about how sitting on your phone too much makes you a jerk. When I was about 22, my mum somehow figured out I had a secret crush on Mark Wahlberg. All I got for Christmas that year were Mark Wahlberg DVDs. From everyone, in various boxes and wrappings, like so many Mark Wahlberg DVDs. I stopped saying, thanks, after probably the 5th one. I've been a vegetarian for 20 years now. Last Christmas, my aunt gave me a barbecue cookbook and told me it was because men won't date a woman who doesn't know how to cook them a steak. Joke's on you, Auntie Lisa. I'm not single because I'm a vegetarian, I'm single because I have a crap personality. When I was 18, my boyfriend's mum got me an Elmo live toy. I thought it was a gag gift, but it wasn't. My boyfriend got angry when I told him that no, I didn't love it. I didn't say that to his mum, though. She was genuinely a very sweet woman. When I had my daughter, my grandmother arbitrarily decided that I was going to collect nutcrackers. Every year, she gives us a new one. So now I have 13 creepy, 1.5-foot-tall wooden men of various types in my living room for the whole of December. I hate them and fully believe that one day they'll rise up and murder me in my sleep. When my sister and I were younger, my dad liked to leave us a Christmas stocking full of small gifts, like novelties, candy, on our beds. This was very adorable until one year, for reasons unclear, he supplied us both with soft adult calendars, like Babes with No Tops for me, oiled up banana hammock wearing Chippendales for my 14 to 15-year-old sisters. After discreetly saying, "What the frick?" to each other on Christmas morning, we got rid of them, and for 20 years, they've never been mentioned by anyone involved. A hot pink sweater that was literally covered in sparkles with a little bow on it. I was 17 and I had to pretend to like it so I didn't hurt my aunt's feelings. When I was 12, I asked my mum for a pair of Converse. Instead of going for the basic ones, she got these checkered pink, red, blue ones that were just so horribly ugly. I pretended to like them, but then asked my mum later if we could exchange them. We did, although I still feel kind of bad. An industrial-sized jar of dill pickles. From my grandparents. The old Costco special, huh? A few years ago, my in-laws handed out their gifts to my wife and me, and my wife's sister and her then-boyfriend. I opened my gift and it was a, very large jar of Cajun seasoning. It was like the size you'd get at Costco. Huge. I was sort of confused because they gave their other daughter's boyfriend 3 to 4 t-shirts, a hat and a jacket from his favorite sports team, along with a gift card to a store he likes. And all they could come up with for me was a seriously huge jar of cooking seasoning? My father-in-law said he knew I liked to cook. I don't like to cook at all, by the way, and I got the impression that they just forgot to buy me anything or couldn't be bothered to come up with anything better. I really don't mind getting a weird gift or even no gift at all, but it hurts when it's so clearly obvious that they didn't care enough to even put a modicum of thought into it, while at the same time I see them buy such thoughtful gifts for their other daughter's boyfriend when I've been their son-in-law for 5 years at that point. I put the seasoning in their pantry before we left to go home. My dad gifted me his old phone when he upgraded. I guess it could have been an okay gift as I had an older phone that I wanted to upgrade, but I just wasn't in a hurry or prioritizing buying a new one. It was the same damn phone I had, and it was more beat up than mine. I was also 30 with the clear ability to upgrade if I wanted to. My uncle gave me a hat once, back in my low to mid-teens. It wasn't an awful hat, but certainly not one I'd ever wear. I felt really bad laughing at it, thinking it was a gag gift, since it clearly made my uncle sad. He's only given me gift cards since. It was years ago, but it still makes me feel awful. So my family makes this our theme. Instead of Merry Christmas, we have Happy Crappy Christmas. Basically, instead of spending hundreds of dollars on gifts we don't know if the other person will like, we just buy dollar store and wish gifts that we're fairly certain the recipient won't like, but we laugh at the idea of it. Last year, I think my sister won when she bought us cheap Chinese butthole bleaching kits. My sister-in-law gives us salt and pepper shakers. The uglier, the better. We have about 10 pairs now. She buys them at yard sales. Usually it's some long-grown kid's school art project, 2 walnuts glued together with googly eyes, and a salt shaker drilled in, 2 psychedelic mushrooms, and 2 very deformed cats. One of the recent videos I did on the channel featured some rather surprisingly habitual salt and pepper shaker thieves, most of whom were described as being older ladies. I wonder if we've had one of them appear in 2 videos in a row. That would be incredible. Also, crappy gift. The same box of specially spiced tea that I gave to my mum the year before. I tried to unload it to my sister-in-law the year after that. My family always did the post office Christmas gift donation thing. You know, the one where you get a kid's age and gender to buy them gifts. Well, even on Social Security, my dad would give us the choice to do it, even if it meant us getting less. I loved it. I always looked forward to it. My mum remarries, and her new husband thinks it's a great idea to sign us up to receive gifts from the program, and I've never felt so ashamed. I think I felt guilty because it felt like I was taking someone's Christmas from them. I kept asking my mum if we're going to do it that year, and when she finally drives us to the post office, I got excited to pick out a name. She drives to the back and instead picks up 3 bags of presents. 3 bags for 2 kids? I was mortified. When I finally opened the presents, they acted like they got them for us. I wasn't allowed to be ungrateful, however, because the people who got me presents went all out. A really warm coat and a soft as frick blanket, art supplies, really nice ones. That helped me get over myself, but I still feel crappy today. As a teacher, a can of shaving cream and a mini razor. I guess that did get used, though, unlike the 57 mugs I received. A queen-sized top sheet, like for your bed. There was no fitted sheet to go with it, and I didn't have a queen-sized bed. A book on beating alcoholism and a book on losing weight. Oh, you know what? Screw you, Aunt Ruth. An ugly homemade felt Santa head. It looked like someone hunted Santa down, shot him, and mounted his head on the wall. It became my favorite Christmas decoration. My sister always buys me joke gifts. The coolest one was a Chinese bootleg Thomas the Tank Engine Voltron. The most what the frick one was a gourd. A jar of peanut butter that was already open. God bless you, Grandma. After a horrible breakup, I got drunk one Christmas morning, went to my room to get my roommate her gift, and came back with an open jar of peanut butter and a half-eaten cracker. I was mortified when I sobered up. My roommate insisted on keeping the peanut butter. My grandmother sent me a pink dress in a size 8 with cutaway shoulders one year. I was a 16-year-old boy. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My wife still receives a little kid's coloring book and crayons every year from her one grandpa and his wife for Christmas. She made the mistake of telling him that she liked to color when she was 8. A year ago, my mum got me a small, novelty-size butter churn for Christmas. It's not pretty, it's not an art piece, and it has no decorative value. The same year, she got my younger brother a Nintendo Switch and Breath of the Wild. One time, my aunt was on the wrong combination of medicines, and yes, she did eventually correct it, but while she was on the cocktail, she gave my brother and I gift bags that had a single clementine and 2 unsharpened pencils apiece. The first Christmas that my girlfriend, now wife, and I spent with my parents, we were opening gifts in my living room, and my mum gave me a vibrating Johnson ring as a stocking stuffer. When I was 14 or 15, I told my mum that I really liked Andes mints. Every year since then, I get Andes mints. I stopped being crazy about them when I was about 20 or so. I have a stack of several years of boxes going until I finally made my husband take it to work to give it away. Snow shovel from my grandparents for my 13th birthday. They said I could use it to make money and buy whatever I wanted. Well, they weren't wrong. My cat bought me a quail once. Did you eat it? That's one heck of a gift from your feline friend there. My brother bought me a body-sized male contraceptive and labeled it, "To the biggest member in the world." I got him a sweet clock that had backwards numbers and turned counterclockwise. We didn't really get along back then. My dad gave me an air compressor. It was about waist high, the size of a mini fridge, the kind that you might have in your garage. Except I didn't have a garage because I was living in an apartment and I had nowhere to put it. I've moved since then, but I still don't have a garage or anywhere to put the thing. So it's sitting unopened in my friend's garage until I can find a better use for it. I'm not at all religious, but that didn't stop my father from giving me an 18-inch tall statue of Jesus. I forgot it in a box in a storage room in his basement when I left. Last year I went through a pretty crappy breakup that kept being dragged through me and my ex being off and on for a while. I started to feel better around Christmas, but still woke up that morning and opened my stocking to find that Santa, my mum, had gifted me a mold-your-own-boyfriend kit out of clay. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry. I did spend a nice evening molding an absolute stud, though. Well, it sounds like it was at least a fun distraction for an evening during a tough time. Arts and crafts are good for this when we're feeling blue. They take up just enough of our brains to placehold for the mind-numbing grief. My in-laws, parents and siblings, all got me pajamas. The issue was when I opened the first set, they said, "Since you sleep so much." What the frick? Clowns. Every year, a new clown. I tried to tell my abuelito that I don't like clowns, they're weird. I get a new clown figurine, doll, lamp, picture, or whatever every year for Christmas and my birthday. I have boxes of clowns. Thankfully, sometime in my mid-20s, my father managed to divert them to kittens, but that was only after 4 awkward years when he decided I love cows. I don't love cows either. On the bright side, since I kept all of them on my dresser growing up, I was never afraid of clowns. They're just background noise to me. I could probably walk right into Stephen King's It and just be all like, "Oh, it's just one more damn clown." My grandmother decided it would be a good idea to gift my sister and my cousin, also a girl, matching lingerie last year for Christmas. The problem being that my cousin was 7 at the time. We still laugh about it when my grandma isn't around. My aunt gave me a banana case. Yes, a yellow plastic thing to put a banana in and protect it from the world. The next year, it was an apple case. For our first Christmas together, my boyfriend gave me this beautifully wrapped Christmas gift. I opened it in front of his entire family, and it was the ugliest pair of shoes I've ever seen, like grandmother slipper clogs. The look on my face told everyone how I really felt, even though I said how much I liked them. They burst out laughing as it was a prank, and my boyfriend had another gift hiding. Even to this day, when my wife and I make pretty decent money, my grandmother, a 96-year-old, still writes us a check for $15 every Christmas. It's very kind of her, but not as awesome to receive in your 30s as it was when I was 12. My grandma decides how much she wants to spend at Christmas and then divides that number by the number of cousins, which keeps growing since my southern cousins are baby machines. Last year, my Christmas check was for $13. Oh, and 46 cents. My neighbor gave me a rather crude painting of myself being run over by his crappy, horrible Bronco. In 2006 for Christmas, I gave my then-fiancée a $450 hand-carved artist's easel. She gave me a 4-pack of Ferrero Rocher chocolates. A large box of Johnnies from my grandma because she overheard me and my ex going at it while she was visiting for the holidays, and walked in on us in the heat of the moment. Thankfully, the lights were off, but yeah, it was awkward and hilarious at the same time. Quality beats quantity. I once had a girlfriend that gifted me about 12 to 15 items of clothing from Goodwill. Don't get me wrong, I have no problem with this in principle. For instance, trying to save money, but it just made no sense because 1, this girl didn't hurt for money at all, and 2, several of the items had stains or other damage. And finally, by getting so many things, she spent more than she would have for one new item of clothing. It was easily the worst gift I've ever received. An avocado. My girlfriend, now wife, used to complain that I bought Annie's organic macaroni. Her parents once bought me a Costco pack of Kraft so she could have good macaroni. I got a seal clubbing nutcracker from a well-meaning family friend. They thought the seal was a pet and the guy was just petting it with his club. Ugh. When we were younger, my grandmother would always give the grandkids a bag full of random stuff. We'd get things like pajamas, fuzzy socks, a stationery set, and things like that, but every year, without fail, she'd always throw in a package of undies. Of course, we'd all act excited and thank our grandmother, but we were still kids unwrapping underwear for Christmas. My grandmother is the sentimental type and also wanted all of us to take turns showing everyone what we got. Usually, we didn't show off our undies, but my grandmother would always say, "I think there's something else. Show everyone what you got." So for Christmas, we had to hold up the undies for our aunts and uncles to see and for whoever else was there for Christmas. She stopped giving us undies once the oldest grandkids started becoming preteens. Looking back, all of us find it hilarious and I'll probably remember it for the rest of my life. My grandmother was just trying to get us something we'd actually use, whether we wanted it for Christmas or not. And being a kid, underwear is definitely a, thanks moment. My husband has relatives who work in a thrift store, so the entire family gets some really weird presents for them. I got a used nightgown, like what grandmas would wear. It was white, but it had turned yellow from age, and it smelled musty too. A stained incense stick holder with some incense sticks in a package that was already opened, a collection of china plates with stains, a shirt so big I could swim in it, a lightly used bottle of perfume that was pretty much eau de mothballs. I just donated them right back to another thrift store. When I was about 10, my grandfather bought me a BB gun for Christmas. Obviously, I thought it was the coolest thing in the world then, but my parents were very uncomfortable with it. And looking back at it, buying a 10-year-old as immature as I was a BB gun was probably not a great idea. With regards to your uncle, he probably knew that you'd think of him as the most awesome uncle ever after that, even if your parents took that thing off you. Some very obviously second-hand cassette tapes of whale music. I've had some amazing ones from my mother-in-law. A how to cook pasta book, a ceramic hen, one candle in a gift box that clearly originally had 2 candles in it, a pasta measurer shaped like a cowboy, and my absolute favorite, chocolate-covered nuts. I'm allergic to nuts and I have an EpiPen. I've had 4 anaphylactic shocks in my life. My husband nearly had a heart attack when I opened that present. In the early 1990s, I got 3 fanny packs from 3 different relatives. A single pair of see-through pink lacy undies for my first Christmas I spent with my boyfriend's, now husband's, family. They were from his 86-year-old step-grandmother. I was 19 at the time and absolutely mortified, but tried to play it off like it was a hilarious gag gift. And I forget to mention, my husband just reminded me, that the panties were 3XL. And yes, I've got some extra winter cushion, but I'm not a big human being. It would take a lot to get me to fit a 3XL. So last year, my dad was short on money for Christmas. I took him shopping to buy stuff for everyone else, and he said he was going to pay me back. He never actually pays back what he borrows, and at the end he asked to borrow money for one more gift he needed to get. I gave him the money and he bought me a gift card. It was to a restaurant I like, but he literally took my money and put it into a less usable form. Remington electric razor specifically designed for black men. My dear grandmother bought it for me. It even said Black Men Razor and had a black dude smiling on the package. I'm about as white as it gets, always have been, probably always will be. Who knows, maybe you're just a late bloomer. Last year, my uncle and aunt got my boyfriend and I a giant white piggy bank with colorful baby symbols around it, to start saving for the baby. We're not married, we're in our early 20s, no baby on the horizon in the near future. It was a bit odd to say the least. Someone sent me a homemade miniature catapult for Reddit Secret Santa. What are they doing? The trebuchet is clearly the superior siege weapon.
Redditors who work in the ER, what's the scariest, dumbest, or weirdest thing someone has come in for? Had a lady come in for shortness of breath, began to place an oxygen mask on her, and she yells, "I'm allergic to oxygen!" and pulls the mask off. I heard the doctor laugh behind the curtain. Maybe that's why she had shortness of breath? Morbidly obese guy came in for lower right quadrant pain. I lifted up his gut and found his lost wallet. Solved 2 problems at once. 20-year-old male came in for stomach pains. Said he was hungry and hadn't eaten in 2 days. Maybe you should try a sandwich. I have a male cousin who landed himself in the ER because he thought that instead of a condom, he could put something tightly around his male appendage and it would force everything to stay inside. Unfortunately, getting it off posed a problem and he ultimately wound up in the ER with a zip tie around his male appendage. His nickname has been Zippy for 5 years now. So, did it work? My friend worked in ER. She had an obese man come in complaining of a rash under his gut. Upon close examination, they found several splinters. When asked, the man casually replied, "Oh, that must have been from the love board." So the crew had to ask for details. Apparently, the couple had to use a board to pry the man's gut up to get to his business for lovemaking activities. Well, there's an image in my mind I'll never lose. A girl came in saying she was miscarrying, claimed 27 pregnancies and 0 live births. Says that in the last 2 years since she went on birth control to help regulate her periods, she's had a miscarriage every month. We had to explain to her that she was experiencing regular periods. You know, this is why you need to pay attention in health class. My aunt is a nurse and this is her story. 2 extremely drunk men come in. One of them fell down the stairs and somehow got glass in his eye. They had pulled out the glass and sealed the gash in his eye with super glue. They had to soak the eye in acetone to get it open. That's terrifying. I'm an x-ray tech, and the hospital I used to work at had a lot of homeless people come in. This one man came in and there was an order to x-ray both his feet. As soon as I got to the hallway with his room, there was a nasty smell. I got to his room, opened the door, and almost puked. He was soaking his feet in water, and it was the worst thing I have ever smelled in my life. His skin was peeling off and getting stuck to the x-ray board. I had to stop a couple times, but I kept my poker face. One case that really freaked me out was a guy that came in that was around my age, mid-20s. He was having severe pain in his shoulder, but claimed he didn't injure it. He gets taken back and gets x-rays done and finds out his body is absolutely riddled with cancer. He was given 1 year to live. The family's reaction to the news was so heartbreaking to witness and something I'll never forget. A number of things come to mind, but top 3 without thinking. 1. Man with a 10-inch cucumber in his rectum. Didn't mention said cucumber until the MD noticed a bump on his stomach. Still didn't say anything until we got a CT result. Number 2. Older man came in with a vibrator in his rectum. Wife couldn't get it out and refused to come with him. Number 3. Younger male came in with priapism. Urologist was called in to drain it. One of the most bloody, horrifying things I've ever seen. I saw him again 3 days later for the same thing. I honestly don't know what a priapism is, and I'm not Googling it. My mom used to work in an ER. When patients came in, she was the one who took their insurance, asked about their symptoms, took their vitals, and things like that. One day, she's entering paperwork for a woman whom I think came in for injuries to her hands, but I don't quite remember. Mom's taking her information, and one of the questions is the patient's occupation. The woman says, "Oh, I'm a stripper. I work for Dinty Moore." Mom responds that she had no idea Dinty Moore hired strippers. The woman says, "No, I'm a stripper," and gestures emphatically in the air with her bleeding hands. Turns out she strips the meat off of cowtails. That's apparently what the meat is in Dinty Moore beef stew, cowtail. I was shadowing in the ER once and this big white lady came in with this massive bruise around her lower stomach area. The doc asked what happened and she responded, "My horse kicked me in my pooter." And I just bit my lip and turned around to force myself to not immediately bust out laughing. Had a car crash through our ambulance bay, action movie style. The entire car was well within the building when it finally stopped. It was a 16-year-old kid carrying his 14-year-old brother who had been shot in the abdomen over some gang stuff. Many people had just vacated that area seconds earlier because there was a CPR that came in, and they were all in the trauma room working on that. If they hadn't been, then there would have been a lot of injuries. I used to work in the accident and emergency department in our city hospital. Without a doubt, the worst thing I ever dealt with was the police and social services bringing in a 2-year-old who had been immediately removed from his home after a child protection visit. The parents had stubbed out lit cigarettes on the child's eyes, on his actual eyeballs. He had the most horrific injuries, both old and new. I'll never forget prepping the child for surgery to have his eyes removed. The fact that any human could do this to another, especially a child and their own flesh and blood, is the scariest thing ever for me. Those people should be buried under the prison. Honestly, that's just awful. So we're going to take a hard 180 here and go back to something funny. Guy came in with a salt shaker lodged in his butt, said he was changing a light bulb, then somehow fell onto it. How do they always fall onto it? My sister had a patient who was interested in having her clitoris pierced but was afraid of the pain. Curious, she affixed a super strong magnet on top of and below the clitoris but couldn't remove them. By the time she got to the hospital, her tissue was essentially dead. The doctor had to scrape the magnets off as there was no other way to remove them. I'm a man and was born with all requisite parts, so you know just how serious this is when I say that story made my clitoris hurt. One time the news was playing on the TVs in the waiting rooms. The anchor mentioned a man shot in a gang-related fight who later died from his injuries. Suddenly, my parents hear screaming and crying in the other room. It was the family of the guy who got shot. They had not been informed yet. Oh, that's terrible. How is the news finding out before the parents who are in the waiting room? Come on, guys. I had a guy who put a flare gun between his legs, I guess pretending it was his thing, and fired it. 3rd-degree burns to the groin are not fun. Probably the dumbest one I've had was a husband and wife who rode in an ambulance together, both clearly drug-seeking. For whatever reason, they were placed in rooms across the hall from each other and kept yelling back and forth about what drugs they were getting. The ambulance was initially called for the wife who had fallen downstairs. No injuries visible or on x-rays. The husband rode in with them and checked in, claiming the wife had fallen into him and taken them both to the ground. The husband's only injury was where he said his feet had tangled in the steps. There was no bruising, swelling, abrasions, nothing. But he had clearly just manually pulled out 5 of his toenails. They were not contiguous toes and it involved both feet, just the nails. Emergency medicine is the daily interface in the process of natural selection. So it takes something truly stupid or crazy to shock me these days. Here's a couple highlights from me. Had a guy come in with a plastic hanger, the hook part, stuck in his cornhole. As it went in, it snapped and broke away from the body of the hanger. Next, the 50-year-old dude who came in with generalized abdominal pain said he had no idea what was going on. Super nice guy, talkative, very friendly. We do an abdomen acute x-ray and all you see is a massive set of batteries floating in his colon. Yep, giant dildo lodged way too far in. Off to the OR he went. Lastly, the nice couple who came in after a vigorous boning session because she broke his thing. One interventional radiology study later, where they inject dye into his urethra to test for patency, and the dye wouldn't advance, showing a stricture in the urethra. Off to the OR he went. One of the stranger complaints I've heard as a resident. I had a 19-year-old guy come into the emergency department on the night shift on 4/20 this year. His complaint was that he got high and he decided he should touch himself and his urethra felt harder than normal. Not his thing, his urethra. I got to the room to assess him and he was in the bathroom peeing. His poor girlfriend was sitting in the corner with her head in her hands out of embarrassment. He got back from the bathroom, stood in the doorway and said, "You know, I feel better now. I think I'm just gonna go home." And then he turned around and walked out. So wait, he just had to pee? I used to be an EMT, and one time we got called to a house in the middle of the night for a patient with belly pain. We get to his house and he's bent over a chair in extreme pain. We get him in the ambulance and start taking him to the ER. The whole drive he's letting out tiny farts that are deadly, also yelling that he just needs to fart. Can't we give him something to make him fart? The ER doc asks us if there's a possibility of a foreign body issue, and I say that I didn't check. The doctor sends him to the CT scanner where he lets rip a fart that echoed. He felt better and left the ER. They had to close the scanner to air it out. You know what? I appreciate that. I wouldn't want to be the next patient walking into that place. I have 2 friends that are nurses in ER. Friend A said that there was a guy who went in because he had a pickle stuck in his butt. Friend B said that there was a guy who went in because he had a pickle jar up his butt. Will everyone stop putting things up their butt? I had a guy walk in completely impaled with a 4x4 wood post. He was drinking and working on his roof when he fell off. His buddy got a chainsaw, cut the bottom off the post, and somehow the impaled guy stood in the back of the pickup truck for the ride to the ER. He walked in the reception area and said, "Hey everybody, I hope you don't mind if I cut in line a bit. This seems quite serious," and promptly passed out. He survived. I worked in an ER for a little over 2 years and as an EMT running 911 calls for another 2. I have plenty of stories, but this one's pretty good. So these 2 20-ish-year-old girls come in and they're lovers. Apparently they had been fooling around and one girl stuck a bottle of hand sanitizer in the other's butt. The bottle was about the same size as a shampoo bottle. Well, it got stuck, so they came in to have it removed. The doctor was able to pry it out of her butt and he threw the bottle in the trash. The girls were discharged and the girl's nurse, who we'll call Steven, and myself walk in to clean the room for the next patient. Steven says to me, "Hey, check this," reaches into the trash and pulls out the offending bottle of hand sanitizer with his bare hands. He squeezes a huge dollop of the gel in his palms and rubs his hands together, laughing hysterically. That was one of the weirdest. Also, once in medical school, I was doing a clinical at a very small 3-bedroom ER in a very rural town, and this giant fat lady accidentally burned her left breast off trying to pour a giant pot of boiling pine sol on the floor. First, the whole hand sanitizer thing, I get that you're cleaning it with the hand sanitizer after, but it's just gross. Second, burnt off? A colleague told me this one. Man came in with a major rager that wouldn't go away. Claims he hadn't taken any drugs, but I have no idea if that's true or not. Turns out he woke up with it, then went to work for a full day before coming to emergency to get checked out. I honestly don't know what happened after that. I don't work in ER, but in a hospital. Back in West Virginia, girls used to come in frequently for just a pregnancy test. Not like they sell them in the dollar store or anything. My absolute favorite was a 23-year-old who came in at like 3 a.m. because their sunburn was itchy. There was also a guy who had a baseball-sized festering stinky sore on the top of his head. He had had it for over a year and was just wearing a baseball cap and ignoring it. You could smell him from the hallway. A dude shot some kind of injectable Mexican Viagra into his thing so he could have some fun with his girlfriend. Turns out he basically totaled his junk. Urology told us that it was never gonna work again. Best part was, he had a wife who he had to explain this to. Finding out that some old dude with a part of his intestine hanging out of his abdomen that drips out poop all the time, and who's unable to get a hard-on without shoving a needle into his business, is somehow married and has a girlfriend while I'm still single as hell, was quite a realization. Well, if it makes you feel any better, he's probably not going to have either for long. So my brother works in the ER. A guy came in the middle of the night with a carrot stuck in his butt. He said he was walking in his garden and fell. Another was a couple who came separately to the ER at night. The girl had a heavily bruised head or something like that, and the guy had a crooked thing. Apparently, while the girl was giving the guy a little bit of fun, she had a seizure, her jaw clenched, and the guy panicked and hit her with something. The situation with the couple sounds awful in so many ways. My brother had 2 varsity football players, rivals from rich AAAs no less, come in with fractured arms, shoulders, and concussions. They actually had to choose between getting them out of their pads and physically restraining them when their screaming alerted one another that they were both in the same ER. Both of them had functioning legs and both were in cleats. There were stitches for staff afterwards. Don't you guys have other stuff to worry about in this moment besides your school rivalry? Come on. My aunt said it was incredibly common for people to come in complaining about terrible stomach pains only to be told that they had a, well, buttload of poop that they just needed to get out. I worked in ER billing, not the ER, but this story actually makes me incredibly angry. I had a less than 10-year-old kid's chart with codes for nausea, vomiting, and a broken rib. So I, being Snoopy and having time to waste, opened up the nurse's notes instead of just entering the info. Turns out the kid swallowed his toothpaste after brushing instead of spitting it out. Mom of the Year freaked out and gave the kid the Heimlich, to the point of breaking her own son's rib. An honorable mention goes to the lady who came in with her workers' comp insurance info ready to go for a laceration, which is pretty common. But in the section for laceration repair, the nurse had angrily scribbled through dermabond and sutures and whatnot to handwrite tiny band-aid in the box. Yeah, this lady went to the ER and wasted a whole bunch of people's time for a paper cut. My godmother was a surgical tech, and the best weird stories all involve things stuck up people's butts. Bottles of Windex, shaving cream cans, tubes for gerbils. Did you know putting live gerbils in your butt was a thing? I didn't know that. The worst part was half of the patients she saw for the "I shouldn't have put that in my butt" were repeat offenders. Then there was the older patient who called her in because he couldn't find his appendage. Turns out he had a ton of foreskin and couldn't pee. Mom had to glove up and use a tongue depressor to uncover the head of his business so he could pee. The ER is full of crazy stuff like this. While I was sitting in a waiting room, a man comes in, maybe 50 to 60 years old, goes up to the counter and tells the lady, "Yeah, I don't know if this is cause for concern or not, but I went to bed on Tuesday night and woke up today." It was Saturday morning. 3 days later, he was told to have a seat and I was out of there soon after, but I've always wondered what the story was behind that one. My curiosity's been piqued here too. Yeah, I'd be going to the hospital too. Please give me an answer to what just happened. A guy came to the ER with an arrow through his head. We thought he was wearing one of those Halloween props, but no, it was real. Watching the neurosurgeons trying to maintain composure when examining the patient was priceless. He went straight to surgery and, from what I understand, did very well. Yeah, I'm sure the surgeons don't have to deal with something quite like this very often. At the time, I was working as a transporter in the radiology department. We shuttle patients in the building to and from tests. I get a page to pick up a patient from our green zone in the ER, non-emergent. I walk into the nursing unit and start looking for the nurse. They see me and get that weird smile on their face. The type of smile in healthcare that makes you worry about what type of patient you're going to be picking up. I walk into the patient's room, introduce myself, and then explain we're off to X-ray. The patient is a very unassuming 20-something-year-old male, non-belligerent, and answers my identification questions very calmly. If anything, he just looks slightly red-faced. I ask him if he's able to walk, and he explains that he's having stomach issues and really would prefer not to. No big deal. I have him get his legs on the stretcher they use as beds in the room and wheel him on over to X-ray. Get him in the room, close the door, and go to fetch the techs to take the images. Now, our X-ray staff is full of seasoned techs with 10+ years of experience on average each. The tech looks at the order and tells me to wait around since it won't be long. Alright, no problem. The tech comes back from the exam room, super quiet about 6 minutes later with a slight smirk. She waves the other techs over to a computer in the back room, away from the patient, chuckles, and pulls the images she just took to be fixed up. Two of the younger female techs bolt away from the computer, hands to mouth, and slam the door. One of the techs whistles, and the older female techs, almost in unison, go, "Well, that could cause an abdomen complaint." Very visible in the rectal cavity was a large toy. Long story short, the patient told the tech that he had a new girlfriend and she wanted to try something new. Little do most people realize that it gets to be like a vacuum to get things out of there, and up it went. 5 hours later, he was released after it was removed, the old-fashioned way. Ladies and gentlemen, this entire video has been a PSA. Don't stick stuff up your butt. Doctors have read it. What's your most surprising, "I can't believe I'm having this conversation with an adult" story? Paramedic here. Was driving with my partner and patient was in the back. Patient was fine. Patient's skeezy boyfriend was riding in the front with me and apparently saw a golden opportunity to ask a question that had obviously been on his mind for some time.
"So, when cats and dogs eat grass, that means they have cancer, right?"
No. No, it does not. Made for an awkwardly silent ride the rest of the way. Where did this guy hear that? I've never heard that before. Well, it looks like she's about 30 days pregnant. Congrats! How can she be pregnant? She's only around her brother. Well, they actually don't follow the same moral code as you or I. I'm a veterinarian, by the way. Thank you for the clarification there. Not a doctor, yet, but I'm an ER tech. For about 2 years now, mom comes in with her baby plus 2 more older kids, complains that the baby hasn't pooped in a while and won't stop crying. As I'm settling them in with one of the nurses, the baby is bawling, like opera singer lungs bawling. Suddenly, mom whips out a white plastic shopping bag and sticks an end in the kid's mouth and says, "This is the only way she stops crying." Nurse and I share a look and immediately order an emergency x-ray on the kid's stomach. Turns out she had ingested a good amount of these bags and it was blocking up in her stomach. Big deal, potentially life-threatening. When we confront the mom about her baby feeding habits, her only words of defense are, "Well, I checked all over the bag and I couldn't find anything on it that said non-edible." This woman's a potential danger to her kids. She has 2 older kids, meaning she was probably doing this with them too before. I told a patient that the 30+ cups of coffee he was drinking every day could possibly be the reason of his chief complaints of anxiety and insomnia. He said he wasn't willing to give this up or try decaf. That's an insane amount of caffeine intake. Like, that's not healthy for multiple reasons. When I was an internal medicine resident, I came across a very nice 50-year-old Dominican lady. She was well-mannered, but one could tell she wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed. As I was prepping her chart for our first visit, I noticed that she'd been seen by every single digestive disease MD in our hospital system. Not only that, she'd had every single procedure in the book, ranging from endoscopies up both holes and culminating in an exploratory laparotomy. You're opened up to basically look inside you when we have no clue what's going on. All of this because for years she'd had one single complaint. She reported severe gnawing pain in her stomach. At this point, I should mention that she was Spanish speaking only. Not only that, she had a very heavy Dominican accent, and I was the first Hispanic doctor to ever see her. My first language is Spanish, and even I had difficulty understanding her. So she comes in, and after exchanging some first-time pleasantries, I politely ask her how she's doing. Sure enough, although she was smiling and said she felt well, she pointed at her belly and said it was biting again and asked for the cream to kill it. At this point, I got intrigued. Her medication list only mentioned a cream used for herpes breakouts. The previous fellow only mentioned in his notes that in every single visit, she only asked for the cream and nothing else. When I asked what she meant by the biting and what she intended to do with the cream, she very calmly tells me she intends to stick the cream up her butt in order to kill the bird living inside her. After delving more deeply into her story, it turns out she didn't have a medical condition. Ever since she was a little girl, she believed that after eating a whole quail egg, the bird had spawned inside her and gnawed away at her insides whenever she was hungry. After a short visit to psych, she was diagnosed with a somatic type delusional disorder. No amount of medication or psychotherapy will cure her, but she was still a fully functional mother of 2 who paid her taxes and had 2 part-time jobs. I reached out to every digestive disease doctor in our hospital system once more to make sure she never receives an inappropriate invasive intervention. I've been following her for 3 years now, and she's as happy as one can be, considering she has a bird living inside her. Why wasn't a translator brought in long before? Why did it take her going through every single doctor and a range of surgeries to finally find someone who spoke Spanish? While in dental school, my friend pulled out several bombed out teeth on an adult male. After the procedure was finished and post-op instructions were given, the man asked, "So when should I expect my new teeth to grow in?" He was serious. My significant other is a med student. He helped to diagnose a 40-year-old woman who finally sought out a doctor after having open, festering wounds on her entire torso for over a year. The open wounds only appeared after more than a year of painful, visible lumps on her breasts. She had never sought treatment prior to this. My significant other had to inform her that her entire body was riddled with cancer, that there was no treatment to help her, and that she would be dead very soon. Her sister, who was there the entire time, began loudly proclaiming what a shame it was that nothing could ever have been done, and that hopefully someday we would be able to detect cancer sooner. My significant other watched the doctor explain that pretty much any other woman in the country would have gotten effective treatment at the first sign of the lumps. This was during Breast Cancer Awareness Month. Guys, if something's wrong, just get checked. Don't put it off for a year. You never know what you're dealing with. Better safe than sorry. As a veterinarian, I had a 10-minute conversation with an owner explaining which side was the dog's left side. It's the left side. The left. I saw a patient who was concerned that she was still lactating, despite the fact that she had stopped breastfeeding her twins 2 years ago. She said, "Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and find my husband sucking on them. He says he's trying to drain the milk for me." I had to explain to her that breastfeeding her husband will lead to continued lactation. Okay, this one's just creepy. Medical assistant to a cataract surgeon here. If you sleep with your contact lenses in long enough, they will fuse to your eyes and you'll need to go to surgery to have them removed. Yes, you can go blind from this. For the love of God, don't sleep with your contact lenses in. Thank you for the PSA and horrifying imagery. Got placed during a rotation in the orthopedic floor of a big hospital in a rural area in Southern California. I was doing my rounds and saw a patient out of bed and walking around the floor following a knee replacement. She had a cane in her hand that she was carrying as a soldier would a rifle. I asked what she was doing and what she thought the cane was for. She replied she thought the cane was for pushing people out of her way since she's now handicapped. I mean, I guess that's one way to use it. I'm a pharmacist, but the comment still relates. Had a lady call in complaining that her husband's Viagra wasn't working. I then went on to explain to the patient's wife that in order for the medication to work, the patient needed some sort of stimulation. The lady just screamed aloud, "Me?" and then hung up the phone. Still my favorite Viagra story. The fact that you have multiple Viagra stories to choose from makes me want to sit down and have a conversation. My friend is a student doctor and is on placement at a small town's doctor office. She had a 70-ish-year-old woman come in with complaints of a small but painless growth that was visible at the back of her throat. Turns out, it took her 70 years to notice her uvula. Yeah, that's been there the whole time. Client brings in her dog for a tick she tried to burn off. Looking, I see it's a nipple and tell her this. She says, "But he's a boy, how can he have nipples?" I say, "Ma'am, your husband has nipples." Blank stare, then light bulb moment for her. Not a doctor, but I regularly have people come in for eye examinations because when I take my glasses off, things are blurry. Often, these aren't passing comments during the exam, but the main reason for their visit to the clinic. Patient comes into ER, 19-year-old male. I'm getting his history. "Why are you here today?" "Every morning I wake up and my stomach hurts." "How long has it been hurting?" "All my life." "Well, what's different today that made you come here?" "My girlfriend doesn't think it's normal." More questions. Exam by ER physician, followed by lab tests. The abdominal pain always goes away after he eats. Always. He wakes up hungry. He thinks it's pain. I don't know what to say to this one. Just eat food? During residency in an urban northeastern USA city, I was in a clinic. A very pleasant 50-something lady came in for a physical. Everything was going fine when she casually asks if there's any new vaccines out. She was up to date with everything, so I asked if she had any specific concerns. She was casually asking to see if she could vaccinate her gay adult son against homosexuality. Very nice, always had a smile on her face, even when I broke the news to her. My mom was the head nurse at a clinic here in Houston in the 80s. She worked for an old World War II doctor that had gone into private practice as an old-school general practitioner when he returned back to the States. Well, one afternoon she told me that they had a patient come in that was running a high fever and was complaining of pain in her pelvic area. My mom also tells me that there was a stench coming from the woman's lap that could only be described as enough to gag a maggot off a meat wagon. She begins to interview the patient, who told her that her and her boyfriend had been sexually active and that she has been in pain since. She thought that the woman may have contracted an STD and asked her to undress and wait for the doctor to examine her. The doctor arrives and closes the door, only to reopen it a few seconds later, mentioning about the need for fresh air. The doctor noticed that there was a discharge and began to question the patient about her sex life. Was it protected, not protected, things like that. According to my mom, the patient told her, "No doc, we always use a rubber." The doctor looked down, then noticed noticed there was a small rubber band extending from the woman's private area. The doctor reached in with his gloved hand and pulled it out. What came next can only be described as a magician pulling the cloth out of someone's mouth. One rubber band after another came out over the course of the next 10 minutes. Finally, once they were all removed, the doctor had the talk with the woman about sex education, and that rubber bands were not a successful contraceptive, and not what they meant by wearing a rubber. That is just horrible in so many ways. Not a doctor, but a dental hygienist. I had to explain that brushing your teeth with Comet, the cleaner, was not a good way to clean your teeth to a 40-year-old woman. I also had to tell a woman that was painting her teeth with white fingernail polish that that was a bad idea. A 32-year-old grown man asked me if the hot spells he was experiencing at night meant he was going through menopause. My mother helps the Amish get dental care. One Amish woman complained that she needed new dentures. When asked why she thought so, she replied, "Well, I've lost weight, and you know that when you lose weight, you lose it in your gums first." Doctors and dentists, if you're looking for a community to serve, the Amish can truly use your help. I could write a book about the things I've seen. Why would you think it would be the gums? It's just such a weird and random place. I was a newly minted graduate with fresh and optimistic views on my life as a doctor. Second week in came this old lady and her very dysfunctional family. They would argue and complain about everything, from the food, the nurses they didn't like, and every single medical decision we made. She was very, very sick, so her management was just as complicated. She had several children, and they all didn't like one another and would not talk to one another. Each time, we would have to explain a long update to every single one of them, because
They're entitled to hear it from a doctor.
one of these stories being sitting down and explaining why you don't give Gatorade as an IV drip. They didn't understand why we were giving salt water to her. The conversation with her son went something like this. "Look, she likes Gatorade. She's drinking it, so why can't you give it to her through her drip?" We explain why, and the son frowns. "But it's isotonic." We explain again. "Yes, but Gatorade has more electrolytes." We explain again. "Salt water just seems to be too cheap. Can't you give her something else closer to Gatorade that has electrolytes?" This continues for 2 hours. Wash and repeat every day during her admission. Afterwards, I told my fiance. He opened up a scene from Idiocracy on YouTube, and I just sat there with my mouth open for a while. Yes, you drink Gatorade. You don't inject it directly into the bloodstream. Two very different things. While on dermatological rotation, a Middle Eastern patient saw me with what she described as some funny itching growth on her butt crack. Some quick investigation revealed it to be a severe case of genital warts. I explained the diagnosis and that it was an STD, until she shockingly assured that she was still a virgin. Now, virginity is a big issue for young Muslim women, or perhaps their families even more. But apparently that doesn't cover other types of sex, and therefore no birth control in the form of, say, condoms was needed. EMT here. I had a grown adult trying to explain to me that someone else pooped his pants. Got called out for finger pain at a homeless shelter at 2 a.m. We get there and the guy jumps in the truck with very mild swelling to the tip of his right index finger. Here's how the conversation went. Me. "So, what happened?" "Yeah, I smoked some stuff and then I fell asleep in my bunk and I woke up next to my bunk and my finger hurt and there was poop." "There was poop? Did you fall in poop?" No, like in my pants." "So, you pooped your pants?" "No, it wasn't me." "So, let me get this straight. You smoked something, took a nap, rolled out of your bed in your sleep, hurt your finger, and someone else came along and pooped in your pants before you woke up?" "That's what I'm saying. It wasn't me." My friend, I think you need to take a step back and analyze the situation here. My brother is a general practitioner in rural Tennessee. Enough said, right? He says most of his patients' visits go something like this. "Well, person, you're pre-diabetic, have high blood pressure, and are complaining about joint pain. Have you been exercising and cutting out sugar and carbs?" "Yeah, I have, doc, but it doesn't seem to help. Do you have any better meds you could prescribe?" "Well, let's talk about your diet. How much water do you drink a day?" I don't like water, as I get extra ice in my sweet tea every day to make sure I get enough water. My brother explains that that's not enough water by a long shot. How much sweet tea are you drinking every day? Those can have a lot of sugar in them. Well, I get a large one from Hardee's or McDonald's or wherever on my way to work with my breakfast, and another one on my way home for dinner. Then I have a glass or two when I get home. Well, that's a lot of sugar, and a lot of fast food if you're eating it twice a day. What do you eat at home? I don't like to cook, so I usually don't eat anything except those Little Debbie snack cakes at home. Those have a lot of sugar too. I thought that all I had to do was cut out Mountain Dew. Now you're saying I can't eat my food or my snacks? What are you suggesting I do? Eat salads for every meal? Why can't you just up my meds? I relate to this patient's eating habits a little too much, probably. I had to explain to an adult that you have to brush all the sides of your teeth. Like, no, just the side that shows when you smile is not enough. And yes, flossing is not just a thing for rich people. Patient comes in at 2 a.m. for insomnia, clearly tweaking her brains out. Heart rate at 200. Can't sit still, bouncing off the walls. I suggest maybe easing up on the snow. But doctor, I love the snow. I was working in GP and had a patient scheduled for an appointment. I looked through his notes to gain an idea of why he may be seeing me, and saw he'd been seen a few times with knee pains and shoulder pains and the like. The guy is in his 70s, so probably just arthritis. I'm thinking I'll do an examination of his sore joints and ask a few questions, prescribe some painkillers, and it'll be a quick one. I call him in and he walks in and sits down and is cheery as anything. What seems to be the problem then, sir? I notice you've had some issues recently with sore joints, I ask him. He then proceeds to tell me about his sore knee. So I check his knee and take a history and it all seems fine. I ask if there's anything else, and he remembers actually his neck is sore too. So I check his neck and nothing untoward to be found there either. At this point, he's like, okay, well, thanks doc, I'll be off then. I say to him, oh, good, glad we could help. And you have no other pains at all before you go? He then sits back down and tells me he's been having central crushing chest pain radiating down his left arm and into his jaw since last night, and has been feeling breathless, and when it happened, he had an impending sense of doom. I know a lot of you won't be doctors here, but I'm sure you all recognize the signs of a heart attack there. He had all the classic textbook symptoms. I called the ambulance and he was rushed to the hospital. Sounds like this dude was taking a heart attack like a champ. My dad told me about an extremely religious male patient who was concerned about his nocturnal emissions. He saw it as an offense to God and wanted to know what he could do to stop it. My dad's response? Well, it's gotta go somewhere, my guy. Nurse here, retired after 27 years on the job. The number of American 20-somethings that don't know if they're circumcised or not is surprisingly high. When one with urinary tract infection symptoms needs to be given a specimen for testing, I ask, are you circumcised? If not, I have to tell them to pull back the foreskin before peeing in the cup. The number of guys who have asked, what's that, is way too many. For the record, I can count the number who were uncircumcised on 2 hands. This one's from my cousin, who's a doctor. He was in his first year in a clinic, and people went there to have an appointment because he was good looking. Elderly ladies loved him particularly, but this is totally unrelated. And the worst case was when this elderly lady goes in with her granddaughter, around 8 years old. She had a severely infected wound on her head. Upon close inspection, he saw the wound crawling with small maggots and the smell was terrible. He was very upset, of course, and asked why didn't she wash the wound and bring her earlier. She said she thought it would heal with time and was afraid to wash it, lest water enters her brain and kills her. There was also a woman that took her 6-year-old daughter there to check why she still didn't have pubes. You know, old folks are supposed to be wise, but when it comes to medicinal stuff, a lot of the times they're very much behind the curve. What's the most WTF thing you've experienced or seen during a flight? I travel quite a bit and have seen a few weird things, but on a recent trip from Vienna to Venice, things were taken to a whole new level. So we're about 20 minutes into the flight when I noticed that a woman sitting across from me had a Persian cat in one of those cat carrier bags. The plane was really warm and the cat was sitting in the bag panting. Well, the lady decided to let the cat out of the bag to let it cool off a bit. After trying to shove the cat's face up into the air vents for a minute, the cat literally literally freaked out. It was clawing at everything, attaching itself to the seats in front, jumping around, hissing, well, you name it. This thing went crazy. Anyway, after about 5 minutes of more of the same, the cat completely lost it, tried to climb the seat in front and, wait for it, fell over dead. We couldn't believe what had just happened. The owner was trying to shake the cat around a bit to wake it up, but it was a goner. For the duration of the flight, she was sat there holding her dead cat, sobbing quite profusely. That's just awful. I would be completely paranoid bringing a pet on a plane, and not because of anything like this happening, just in general. On a red-eye flight, just as I fell asleep, a woman passed out in the middle of the aisle and hit my leg. I was so doped up on Dramamine, I didn't even realize it and fell back asleep. The flight attendants put an oxygen tank on the floor and put the tank masks over her mouth. Apparently, they used my hand to hold it in place. So when I woke up a few minutes later, I was like, why am I holding an oxygen mask over someone's face? Hey, you're literally out there helping save lives in your sleep. I was on a Gulf Air, as in Persian Gulf, flight as a kid in the late 80s, and a Pakistani family a few rows behind me in coach lit up a barbecue. It was one of those little portable aluminum foil things. You never heard so many flight attendants scream so loud. Yeah, talk about different times. I walked onto the plane and gave the first steward I saw a bag of Hershey's miniatures. This is for the crew. The whole flight, I was given free headphones and all the free drinks I could handle. I tried to pay, but she just kept giving me my money back with every drink. Apparently, chocolate's very valuable in the air. I was about 15 and flirting with a cute girl in the seat next to me. My family was about 2 rows back, with my younger brother, and the lady that occupied the third seat pretty much set me up the entire flight. This old lady was the best wingman ever. Anyway, I get up to use the restroom and she says she has to go too. She gets out first and I'm waiting for her to finish up. We've been flirting pretty much the whole flight, and she knows that I'm right behind her in line. So she finishes using the bathroom and I walk in. Right there in the toilet is a gigantic unflushed poop. To this day, I have no idea how you respond to something like that. Not really a WTF moment, but kind of funny. So we're flying out of Cleveland and the pilot comes over the PA and gives his welcome, blah blah blah. So we're just leaving Cleveland, we should be in, And then slightly under his breath, but not quiet enough that everyone else didn't hear, he says, "Where the hell are we going?" Long pause. "Chicago." Everyone laughed. Good times and high times. I sat beside a Scientologist who tried to convince me to go into business with him. He wouldn't explain what the business was. How are you going to ask me to invest if you're not even going to tell me what I'm investing in? Come on, buddy. I was flying to Denver on Delta in winter 2009, and they were switching from cash to credit only. They just got their brand new machines to swipe cards, and I was one of the first people to test them out. I ordered a 7 and 7, and it was $7. She took my card, swiped it, and the thing that printed out was $0. I left a $3 tip and thought, cool. About 10 minutes later, she came by and asked if I wanted another. I said, sure, why not? I swiped the card, and another $0 transaction. Bought lunch, $0. So I ordered 4 more 7 and 7s and got hammered for around $20 in tips. I checked my bank account the day after and sure enough, only the tip showed up. I have no idea what happened, but that was one happy flight attendant. Sounds like you did pretty well for yourself too, my friend. A guy died next to me once. On a flight from Maui to Dallas, I was half asleep in the second to last row of the plane. While I was listening to music and dozing, I suddenly heard a really loud, hard thud next to me. I look over and there's a man lying on the ground, completely still. I thought maybe he tripped, but the flight attendant came running and he was unresponsive. She frantically ran up and down the aisles asking for doctors. Luckily for him, the flight was full of vacationing doctors and nurses. All of them in ridiculous clothes. 2 of the doctors who came back were in Hawaiian shirts and golf attire, and the female nurse who came back was wearing a very strappy, revealing blue Hawaiian print dress. The doctors tried to wake the man up, but he was gone. I was surprised to find out just how much medical equipment they have on commercial flights. The docs whipped out a portable defibrillator and shocked the guy, then set up an IV drip for him. I never heard a word out of him or saw him move. Not sure if he actually woke up or not. Our flight was diverted to LA. And when we landed, half a dozen EMT personnel ran onto the plane to pull the guy out on a gurney. Unfortunately for me, this scenario set off a panic attack, and I had to go find a nice spot in the aisle to lie down so that I didn't pass out and cause more problems for the crew and doctors. It was kind of embarrassing. One time, I was the only person on a very big plane from DC to Atlanta. They told me they wouldn't normally fly, but they really needed the plane in Atlanta first thing in the morning. I got great service, by the way. Since then, I've used this as the setting for an erotic fantasy. An older man unsuccessfully attempting to get some action from his wife in the seat in front of me. Honey, I got the blanket in place. My wife was coming to visit me in Africa a few months ago. On some third world airline, a passenger sitting next to her pulls out his thing and starts peeing into a bottle, then hands it to the stewardess who didn't even bat an eye. I'm sorry, is there no bathroom on the plane? I was in an aisle seat on a flight from LA to Austin, Texas. About an hour into the flight, I noticed this awful smell. I look up from my book just in time to see this 70-year-old woman violently throwing up in her lap. Since I'm a sympathy vomiter, I turn towards the people in the other seats to try and avoid doing the same thing. After about a minute of this and the rancid smell of old people vomit, she's led to the bathroom. As she's leaving her seat, she poops herself in the seat. So I get to spend the rest of the flight gagging as this poop and vomit aroma assaults my nostrils. The flight attendants tried to clean it up as best as they could, but it made no real improvement. Ugh, that's awful to have to sit through, but also just kind of feel bad for that lady. She's obviously having a really rough time. While waiting to use the bathroom on the way to Panama, the door somehow opened while this guy was hunched over the toilet, pleasuring himself. At first, I couldn't believe what I actually saw. As his head turned to see the door come open, the most awkward eye contact moment of my life unfolded. He turned to shut the door in a panicked fashion, exposing his junk. At that point, my WTF face became encrusted into my facial features for the rest of the flight, and even the next day. Ever since that time, I can hardly use any bathroom on a plane. I was taking a business flight to Chicago when, about halfway through the flight, a man was walking back to the lavatory but completely passed out and hit the floor next to me. People started chattering and calling for help while this guy pops out of first class and says, "Don't worry, I'm a doctor," and addresses the situation like a boss. It was Dr. Oz. Oh, great. Is there any other doctor on board? On the way to Japan, I look across the aisle and see an old man sitting with an old woman I assume to be his wife. He reaches into his bag and pulls out a large stash of adult magazines and proceeds to sit and look at them for many hours of the flight. I'm sure he says he just reads them for the articles. I was flying Calgary to Houston, which is about a 4-hour direct flight. We were just about 2 hours into the flight, or coincidentally, just about to Denver, when the pilot announced we would have to turn back to Calgary. So around we go and land in about an hour 15. He really cranked it. We touch down and taxi over to the mechanics. They open the cargo door and shut it again. And in 15 more minutes, we were fueled up and in the air and off to Houston. This time it was about a 3-hour flight, full thrust the whole way. Luckily, there was an industry guy behind me, and I overheard him speculating the reason. His idea was that since the airline had paid mechanics in Calgary and probably not in Denver, it would be cheaper for them to turn all the way around to Calgary than pay all the costs associated with landing in Denver. Luckily, it was just a little glitch, and not a true problem, but it was anyone's guess the true issue. I have a friend that's familiar with the inner workings of the plane, and he said that anytime they open the cargo door and unplug a certain cable during maintenance, some switch has to be flipped to reset the alarm system for that door. He said it's an extremely common mistake for that switch to not get flipped after work has been done, and it results in false alarms. All that cost, likely in the tens of thousands, because one guy forgot to flip a switch. I'd be more annoyed at the waste of time, honestly. Just land in Denver, come on. On a flight a few weeks ago, the flight attendant started to make preparations for landing, telling people to put their trays up and whatnot. I noticed the flight attendant loudly speaking to a man in his late 20s or early 30s sitting 2 rows in front of me. "Sir, you need to put your seat back up. Sir, sir." The guy starts spitting blood and convulsing. It sounded like he was choking on the blood with each gasp of air. The flight attendant starts screaming for help, and they make an announcement over the PA for a doctor. 4 passengers and all flight attendants leap into action. Turns out, the lady in the row between me and the sick man is a nurse. Together, they get him laid out in the row with his head in the aisle. He's not responding to their questions, and he's fading in and out of consciousness. We make an emergency landing, 20 minutes ahead of schedule. As we're taxiing, he regains consciousness and tells the flight attendant holding his head that he's sorry for the trouble. We land, paramedics meet the plane and carry him off. He seemed to be stable, but I hope everything worked out for the guy. Yeah, that's gotta be a really scary moment for everyone around. Spitting blood and convulsing is not something that you want happening on a plane. This one happened to my cousin. He was flying in South America, and about halfway through the flight, he realizes he really needs to go to the bathroom. The plane he's on is a tiny prop plane made for tiny people. He's 6'5". He awkwardly climbs over his aisle mates and stumbles and shuffles to the back of the plane. As he's closing the door, the captain comes on the loudspeaker and warns of upcoming turbulence. He thinks, screw it, I really need to pee. He crams himself into this tiny bathroom and manages to whip it out. And right as he starts to pee, they hit a huge bit of turbulence that knocks him off his feet, backwards, through the bathroom door, and flat on his back in the aisle, still peeing straight up in the air. He was completely mortified and managed to get back up, pick up the door, and work himself back into the bathroom. He waited for like 20 minutes hoping no one would have seen it or that they would have forgotten about it by then, but when he went back out to take his seat, he got a standing ovation from every single person on the plane. Ouch. I feel like this story might be a little bit embellished, but I like the visuals here. I used to travel internationally a lot when I was younger and working for a telecom company designing new infrastructure. On one of the trips as we were heading to China, I looked out the window. We were above Alaska and bearing straight somewhere, and the horizon had a huge slice of black, like some weird wedge-shaped cloud that encompassed half the horizon. It was a bright day on the ground or sea below us. The ice was very bright and white, but there was this giant dark wedge encompassing and seeming to take over the earth as you looked out to the horizon. I had the guys next to me take a look out as well, and they were confused at first too. I was really confused for a few minutes. Then I realized what I was looking at in profile and what that black engulfing wedge really was. It was night. We were flying in such a manner that we were surfing the edge of daytime and nighttime at 35,000 feet. And at that moment, if you looked out over the horizon, you saw daytime fading into night. I only saw it that once. It was being in the right place at the right time. Aside from bad in-flight movies, that would be my most WTF experience. That sounds like that would be absolutely incredible to see. I'd love to see photos of something like that. I'm sure you could find it on Google. The bathroom sink on a Bangladeshi Airlines flight from Thailand to Nepal was clogged and had about 1,000 water bugs living in it. I was on a plane that lost power just as it was throttling up for takeoff. And I don't mean they reduced power to the engines. I mean all the lights went out, the engines shut down, and we were left sitting on the runway for a good few minutes. Somehow, the plane regained power and we taxied to an adjacent tarmac for another few minutes. After this, the pilot announces to the rest of the passengers that they had a small technical glitch and that we're now ready for takeoff. The rest of the ride was uneventful. I mean, yeah, you would want that to be the end of the events. You don't want that happening in the air. I was on a flight home from South Africa after a family vacation. My dad is diabetic, but he usually keeps his blood sugar levels pretty regulated, so I never worried before. Mid-flight, I wake up from a nap and see him slumped over the side of his seat. He was taken to the back of the plane where 3 doctors were examining him. They said his heartbeat went up to 220 or something, which I think means he was about an inch from death. All I remember is seeing my mom and brother break down. I began having flashes of life without my father, and it overwhelmed me. I felt sick to my stomach, imagining what life would be like, when all of a sudden his heart rate stabilized. The doctors on board said that it was a miracle, and I felt so much relief. The plane had to stop in Senegal where my dad was transferred to a hospital. He wanted me to keep going since the semester was starting soon. That flight home alone was terrible. I felt the other passengers watching me the entire time. He's all right now, but every time I get on a plane, I remember that feeling of leaving the whole world behind. I was on a flight from Amsterdam to New York one time, and there was this kid who was running up and down the aisles trying to bite people. As he was heading down the aisle at full speed, a stewardess suddenly pulled the refreshment cart into the aisle right in front of him, and he ran smack into it face first. She said to him, "Oh, sorry, didn't see you coming. You shouldn't run down the aisle like that," or something like that. I know she did that on purpose. It was awesome. Hey, you know what? Someone had to. I went to Vegas with my wife. First, let me say it was an early flight. We got there extra early for check-in, put our bags to the side so as not to get in anyone's way. This 300+ pound greaseball wearing a Hawaiian shirt and shorts comes waddling in with one carry-on bag, remember this as it's important, and knocks over my neatly stacked out-of-the-way baggage. It's also 15 degrees outside, freezing, and 5:15 in the morning. I'm like, whatever, no big deal. Later, we get on the plane. My wife has the window, I'm in the middle, and here comes too fat for the seat Hawaiian guy with his little bag to sit on the end next to me. Great. Believe me when I tell you, this guy smelled like a dead animal covered in throw up and poop. I literally dry heaved when he sat down next to me. The guy had a carry-on bag that he was clenching like it contained something of the utmost importance. Obviously not deodorant. And he was sweating through his thin red flowered shirt while everyone else was bundled in heavy winter jackets. We hadn't even taken off yet, and I was becoming violently ill smelling this guy. I had to stuff my face in my sweater and throw my head into my wife's lap to try and escape the smell. After an hour, the guy became increasingly fidgety and paranoid. This made him sweat more. I can't figure out how a guy who sweated so much was so fat. He was like a walking sauna of used banana hammocks. Finally, the guy got up to use the bathroom, and as soon as he closed the bathroom door, people began ripping cologne and perfume ads out of magazines and rubbing them on his sweat-soaked chair. I kid you not. People were offering their apologies to me for having to sit next to him. And then the stewardess comes over and says, "I'm sorry, the flight is booked. There's nowhere else to put him." And I'm staring at her like, what? I never even said anything to anyone about it. That's when I realized this guy was such a disgusting mess. People were actually rallying around trying to help me. It was the weirdest moment of my life. For the next 5 hours, he made about 20 more trips to the bathroom, and each time, different rows would come over to rub his seat down with cologne. Oh, and guess what was in the bag? Adult magazines. Piles of adult magazines. He took a new one to the bathroom with him each time. I haven't been on a plane since. Yeah, that's gotta be just about the worst person you'd have to sit next to on an airplane. I was on a flight to Chicago. We were supposed to land at O'Hare, but about 30 minutes before landing, they told us it was too icy and we were diverted to Midway. The two are about 26 miles apart. So we land at Midway, we disembark, and as we're leaving the Skyway, a gate agent runs up and tells us we need to get back on the plane. They were now going to take us to O'Hare. We all said, screw it, we'll stay here. She then informed us our bags wouldn't be getting unloaded. We would need to go to the other airport to get them. So about 5 of us out of a full flight of 90 got back on and had to wait about 20 minutes to de-ice the plane, then a 15-minute flight to O'Hare. From the flyer's point of view, this just seems like a complete waste of time. I get that they must need the plane at that airport for something, but come on. Everyone's already deboarded, you got a few people left, just roll with it. The die has been cast. Not my story, but my sister's. She was once on a long-haul flight from London to Hong Kong. During the night, while everyone was sleeping, suddenly a woman let out the most blood-curdling scream. Since this wasn't long after 9/11, everyone was pretty on edge as it was. It turned out that the woman had just had a bad dream. Everyone was pretty annoyed after that. Hey, come on, it's not her fault. She has no control over that. I get that you guys would be annoyed, but come on, give her a break. Redditors who have caught their significant other cheating, how did you catch them? Did you give them another chance? We went to a Halloween party at a friend's place. I'd known she's had a bit of a crush on one guy who was to attend. At one point late in the night, she was quite drunk. She lined up at the washroom immediately after he went in. I kept a bit of an eye on her, and when the bathroom door opened, she went in, but he didn't come out. I stood at the door and waited. When it opened and he stumbled out, I immediately went in and confronted her about it. I'm proud of myself for not committing murder that night. We're going through divorce now. 10 years married with 2 kids. Really? You're gonna do it at a mutual friend's party in the bathroom? That's just got bad idea written all over it. I didn't catch him. He called me the next morning crying and told me everything. I respected his honesty, recognized his remorse, and truly believed it would never happen again. So I decided to forgive him. But after he cheated, he became incredibly paranoid. He started checking my phone, accusing me of revenge screwing people behind his back. Even got mad when I was assigned to work with a man on a group project in school. I couldn't stand by the fact that he was the one who cheated and I was the one being punished. I really had forgiven him. I wasn't holding his mistake over his head, and my attitude toward him didn't change after the fact at all, but he was driving me away more and more every day. After about a month of this, I broke up with him and he completely lost it. Sounds like this was a hitch in the relationship that you guys just weren't gonna get through, one way or the other. I met my future husband when I was 15 years old. By the time I was 20, we were married, and I was pregnant with my first child. At 22, I gave birth to our second child, and that's when things changed. Suddenly, he was never home. He would leave the house to pick up milk and return at 5 a.m. He was drinking so heavily that most mornings he'd wake up in a panic, wondering where he'd left his car, only to find it in the driveway. Luckily, he'd never killed anyone driving home while blackout drunk. My husband had wanted to be a writer, so I would constantly find half-written stories or story outlines in these hardcover journals. He left them everywhere, and I'd pick them up and pile them on his desk. One night, I'm getting ready to host a party for my father's 50th birthday. The hall was already booked and I had already decorated. We were expecting about 80 guests. I was quickly trying to get ready and out the door as I had to be there before guests started arriving, but I could not find my pantyhose anywhere. While rummaging through our dresser drawers, I found them, along with another one of his hardcover journals. I opened it up and scanned a page wondering why this particular book was stashed in a drawer. As I read what was on the pages, my entire world was crashing down on me. Not only was my husband an alcoholic, he also had a pretty serious drug addiction. Then the worst part hit me. He was having an affair with my best friend. She was my maid of honor, my best friend since we were 10 years old. I ran to the washroom and threw up. I just couldn't handle the information I'd just gotten. I quickly finished getting ready and left the house. I hosted that party that night with both my husband and my best friend in attendance, and did so with a smile on my face. It was a tough night, but I survived. We've since gotten divorced, and I no longer have contact with either of them. Yeah, a lot of red flags there, unfortunately. Going out for milk and not coming back till 5 a.m.? I'm sorry, but I'm gonna need some answers. And the worst part is, he was cheating with your best friend. He was my first proper boyfriend, and in hindsight, he was a pretty crappy boyfriend. But at the time, I thought the sun shone out of his butt. So I was crushed when out of the blue, he dumped me, with no reason. A week later, a group of his friends who'd taken a liking to me contacted me with the real reason for our breakup, because apparently they'd seen what was happening and they were sick of his crap. Basically, he'd been seeing another girl behind my back, and when she found out about me, she refused to sleep with him. So he dumped me in the hopes of getting into her pants. She inevitably told him to get lost, at which point he tried getting back with me. I did not take him back. I found out while I was deployed. The guy she was cheating on me with emailed me and told me everything, every detail. He apologized and told me he had no idea we were together. I put a hole in the wall, went to smoke an entire pack at the smoke pit, went back to my laptop, and I thanked the guy. You gotta at least respect the guy for coming to you and letting you know. If he honestly didn't know she was with someone, at least he's doing what he can to try and make it right. My girlfriend was out with a friend, we'll call her Susan, on a girls' night until all hours, and told me she was staying at Susan's place for the night. The next time I see Susan, she pulled me aside and told me that they actually went to the house of a guy my girlfriend worked with. We'll call him Patrick, because that's his name. Susan goes on to tell me that she woke up in the middle of the night and found my girlfriend fooling around with Patrick on the couch, while Patrick's girlfriend was asleep in the bedroom. I thanked her for letting me know, then went home and told my girlfriend to pack her stuff. I kinda hope someone told Patrick's girlfriend too. The whole situation is messed up, but she was in the house. My ex-wife and I were together for 6 years, married for 2.5 of them. She worked in a hospital and started getting a little too buddy-buddy with a doctor. I confronted her about it and she assured me he was just a friend and tried to make me sound crazy. She even had this idea in that she could convince or trick me into being friends with him so that she could be with him without me being suspicious. I did everything I could to get her to talk to me, but she never would. It's a very long, sad, and messed up tale. Eventually, all her lies started making less and less sense. I found a program that would decipher text messages and picture messages from an iTunes backup of her phone. It had all the evidence I needed. I still can't shake all the texts, images, and general disrespect of our marriage and family that I discovered. We have a 2-year-old together after all. This was a little over a year ago, and I still have serious bouts of depression over it. The day I found out, I texted the picture he had sent of his junk to both him and her. She came home sobbing and trying her best to convince me to try our marriage again. I could never trust her again, nor did I want to try, but for a while I thought that maybe I should give it a chance. That was a waste of a couple months of my life. She refused to change jobs or stop contacting him, even with the threat of losing her family looming over her head. I made the hardest decision of my life, that it would be better for my daughter to grow up in 2 separate homes where she didn't need to witness her parents constantly fighting her in tears. I share 50-50 custody of her with my ex-wife, which saddens me deeply because I can't see her as much as I want, but it's better than her growing up in a household full of lies and deceit. Throughout the ordeal, I lost 30 pounds from constant stress and depression. I learned that people don't change. Selfish people will always be selfish people. I did, however, receive the amazing gift of a child from it all though, and I would never change that. That's really rough to hear, my friend. That's probably the worst part, is that when that trust is gone, it's almost impossible to get back. And it sounds like your wife wasn't really putting in any work to get there either. I was deployed in Iraq and my wife was being distant for a few weeks. During my deployment, she mentioned several times in phone calls this contractor she was working with and how much they click and all. I trusted her and never thought that she was cheating, but I joked about it and we laughed it off. I even met the guy while home on leave and he shook my hand, thanking me for my service. A month later, I'm back in Iraq, and one particular night I can't get a hold of her. I called and no answer. I'm very much a trust my gut type of guy, and I had a sinking, sickly feeling of something being up. I never was one of checking or sneaking into her accounts, but we shared passwords with each other. I decided to check her Facebook account. There was nothing in her inbox, but there was one lonely message in her outbox she didn't delete to the contractor guy she worked with, saying, "I will always love you." That was when my world came crashing down. Shortly afterwards, she finally calls me back, not knowing I know, and confesses she's pregnant with his baby. I couldn't get a hold of her because she was with her mom confessing what she had done. That night, I remember punching a wall and straining or broke my thumb, and leaving my barracks knocking over a porta potty. Thankfully, nobody was in it. There was a month or two before I was to be home, and we tried working it out being distant. Once I got home, I decided to give it another chance. She told me she would stop talking to him and request him to be removed from her project. I met her at the office one day for lunch, and she wasn't in her office yet. While waiting for her, I saw she had her email pulled up, but not her usual email. Turns out she had a secret email account with him. After that, I was done and out. The one thing some people don't know is that there can be layers to unravel when your significant other is cheating. My doubt started when I took my significant other's phone on accident, unlocked it, and bam, texts that were pretty inappropriate. I confronted her about it and she tried to talk her way out of it, but they were just texts, so I told her to stop doing it and everything would be fine. Unfortunately, I found out in a pretty annoying way. I was chilling at home and I get a message from a really good friend if I wanted to go play laser tag. We're in college and it's what bored college kids do. I decline and just go about my evening. The next day, I'm talking to that exact friend and he lets me know that my significant other and this other guy, the guy that she was sending the text to and that everyone else also knew, were being a little bit too close. I confronted her and bingo, she was cheating on me. Ended soon after that. A surprise visit from out of town. She's not home. Well, it was a surprise and I wasn't sure of her plans for the evening. So I go to my mom's house to wait a while. A few hours later, I go back to my girlfriend's apartment, but she's still not there. On a hunch, I drive by her male friend's place and sure enough, her car is there. I get an uncomfortable feeling about it, but try not to worry. So I go back to my mom's place to get some sleep. Up early, I go over to my girlfriend's again. Not there. Drive around the block and she's still at that dude's place. I never liked that jerk. At this point, I'm angry. I go back to my mom's and call my girlfriend's home phone. The message was something like this: I came into town last night and we need to talk. A few hours later, she rings the doorbell and we go upstairs. She confesses that she cheated. I was in love with this woman, so I accepted her apology and gave her another chance. We stayed together for a few months, but I came to realize I couldn't forgive her so easily, especially since she was still hanging around that guy. So we broke up. The end. When they're caught and they're not willing to cut off contact with the person that they were caught with, there's definitely going to be problems. They can't seriously expect you to sit there and just be okay with you continuing to spend time with them. I'd been dating a guy for a few months. We didn't have a title on it, but a couple months before the incident, we had decided that we had no interest in seeing others and we were exclusive. He decides he wants to buy an iPad, and a few days later, I asked if I could see it to see what apps he had, and if there were any I might like to put on my own. I noticed an app called MeetMe that has around 5 or 6 notifications on it. I honestly had no idea what it was, so I opened it. It went straight to his inbox, which was full of messages from other women. Just as I saw that, he asked if I was ready to go to the grocery store, so I left it there. He could tell something was up at the grocery store, but I didn't bring it up in public, obviously. We get back to his place and I open up the app again. I said, "What's this app on here called MeetMe? I've never heard of that before." He said,
"Oh, it's just a social networking site, kind of like Facebook. It's really big with my friends from up in Oregon."
So I open up a message that says something like, "Hey girl, you want to come see me so I can play with those tatas?" Or something along those lines. I said, "Oh, so this blonde girl Shelly is gonna fly all the way from Oregon so you can play with her tatas? How sweet of her." Then we get into a huge fight, with him mostly claiming that I'm not his girlfriend so he can still do things with other girls, seemingly forgetting about the exclusivity talk. It ends with him confessing that he did it because he's in love with me and those strong feelings scared him, so he turned to other women, but he never actually met up with any of them. He also cried, so that was cool. I gave him another chance, but we crashed and burned not too long afterwards because I just couldn't trust that sketchy jerk. That's one of the worst, most popular excuses for cheating I've ever heard. It's just stupid when you think about it. The fact that people think that this is a legitimate excuse just shows how stupid they are. My ex just started grad school after being out of undergrad for about 2 years. We'd been going out for nearly a year. She would introduce me to a lot of her classmates and stuff, and we'd start to hang out with some of them. The people she had made the best friends with were guys, which I didn't have too much of a problem with. Most of them seemed cool. One of the guys she was probably the closest with, and she started talking about this guy all the time. He had just gotten married a couple months prior, I guess. I had met him a few times, and I got just a bit of a jerk vibe from from him. But whatever. A couple weeks go by and she just starts to act different. It's our anniversary weekend and I have dinner plans for us. Get a nice card, all that kind of stuff. She has to cancel on me at the last minute because she has to study. That weekend, I stay at her apartment because I need to do something downtown the next day, and I wasn't living around there. She ended up having to go to her parents' house for some reason. She left her laptop and I took it to go on Gmail. Her Gmail was logged in, and I know I really shouldn't have done it, but I started to poke around just a little. I felt terrible while doing it, but I could feel some distance between us and she wouldn't talk to me about whatever it was. She had deleted the majority of her Gchat conversations, but must have overlooked one of them. It was a quite obscene conversation with that married guy about what they had done that weekend and many other times before that. So I took the card I had gotten for her, wrote F you all over the words, telling her how I had loved her, and set it on her computer with that conversation still open, and left. That's it? No follow-up? I guess she just came home and found that and put it all together and decided to let it go? My first boyfriend cheated on me with his ex at least twice, but I didn't actually find out until years after we broke up. He and I got together for drinks and to catch up, and I just flat out asked him if he'd slept with her. He couldn't answer me, and that answer was enough. Looking back, I knew in the back of my mind something was up, and I should have accepted that and moved on sooner. The paintings she did of him, the way he'd disappear for days after seeing her, heck, he even drove to my school in her car to tell me we should take a break. Ugh. It makes me angry to think about how naive I was. I was trying to be the cool girlfriend who didn't mind her boyfriend hanging out with his ex because they were just friends. Joke's on me, I guess. My ex-boyfriend and I had been dating for 2 years when he cheated on me. It was his birthday and we were supposed to be going out for dinner that night. I decided to surprise him with his birthday present earlier that day. I went over to his house since he was off from work and saw that he had left the door unlocked. So I went in and called out for him, but he didn't answer. His TV volume was turned up really loud, so I went up to his room just to catch him pile driving my cheer captain. There was no confrontation. I left quietly, though I did come back to stick nails in his tires out of spite. He begged me to forgive him, but I declined. I won't lie, I was tempted, but it really hurt. To give him everything, and I mean everything I could emotionally, and he was my first, for him to turn around and betray me like that really hurt. I will say that holding grudges did me no good. I was able to forgive him just for closure purposes. When it comes to forgiving someone for something like this, that's more what it's for. It's for you. You need to be able to move on, and it's hard to do that when you're still holding on to those feelings. My roommates in college confronted her after they knew she had someone over while I was out of town. She convinced them that she would tell me what had happened. After I returned and 24 hours passed, my roommates told me because they let her have her time. I kicked her out immediately and ended it. About a month later, she moved into the same building, same floor across the hall. Her door was about 8 feet from mine. It's a college town with tens of thousands of apartments. And no, it was not to see me. We talked once after the breakup, and it was truly over. That's incredibly awkward to have to be across the hall from each other after all of that. My wife had been acting distant for a few weeks, and suddenly started meeting a female friend of hers a night a week or so. I was suspicious, especially when the friend called looking for her on a night that they were supposed to be out together. A few nights later, I found some pictures and text messages on her phone. We argued, and I ended up going to my buddy's house at 3 in the morning. God bless him. The next day, we argued some more, and of course it was my fault. After all, I didn't pay her enough attention. We went to counseling, and I stayed because of our kids, but I've never forgiven her, and honestly, I wonder if staying was a mistake. The marriage was rocky once he met a girl in his summer session course and was studying with her while I was gone at work. Sometimes she'd come early in the morning, like 6 a.m., and then be there when I got home at 9 p.m. He would make her breakfast, lunch, and dinner with the groceries I was buying for us with my hard-earned money. I put my foot down and said that he had to limit his time with her, that my needs weren't being met. He was withholding sex for weeks at the time, citing that he was too tired or stressed. He said I was overreacting, that nothing was happening between them, and that I was just trying to sabotage his career goals. I read his chats with her, regular, and he was pouring his heart out about our troubles, but there was no evidence of cheating. I sent him to sleep on the futon the day I came home from work to have lunch and found them boxing in the backyard shirtless. In the following months, I tolerated none of his crap, but what really got me was when I happened upon a pros and cons list comparing me to his ex, his study buddy, and some other girl I hadn't even heard of yet. I also found love letter drafts to 2 girls thrown in the trash, not even hidden. Needless to say, I ended it right quick and kicked him out. I was actually pretty merciful and let him live in the garage for 3 weeks, but he definitely didn't deserve it. Last I heard, he's dating the 3rd girl on the list and living with his study buddy. Jerk. This sounds like it has nothing to do with you and more with him just not knowing what he wants. Sadly, a lot of the times that's the way it goes. It's not the person who got cheated on that has anything wrong with them. It's the person who did the cheating. What's your horror story with bad parenting from strangers? I'll start. I'm in line at the DMV today and I see a mom who looks, honestly, maybe 35 years old, tops. She has what can only be a 14-year-old daughter with a skin-tight t-shirt with what little cleavage she has on display, along with shorts cut so short that her butt is hanging out. This girl's on her cell phone just yelling up a storm at whoever she's talking to. It's straight out of Maury Povich, because the best part is her mom is dressed exactly the same. Her 3-year-old son is running around screaming at the top of his lungs, bumping into people, and at one point I turn my back and he runs up and hits me on the back of the leg. I had the audacity to ask the mother to watch her kid and I get a huge mind your own business rant. She then proceeds to place him in a stroller, give him a Pepsi and some flaming hot Cheetos. Where on earth have all the parents gone? Why is it more important to be friends with your kid? What would you have done? As a side note, when she yelled at me to mind my own business, I said, fair enough. Her reply,
Yeah, that's right.
I honestly just laughed out loud. What else can you do in that situation? If she's not going to parent the kids, it's not like you can. I used to work at a sandwich shop and there was a man in line with his son. The little boy was a bit bouncy and kept tugging on the man's arm saying, "Daddy, I need to potty real bad." And the dad would say, "In a minute, son." This went on for like 5 minutes and the little boy says, "Daddy, I have to potty now." And the man all of a sudden turns to the son and backhands him across the face and yells at him, "I told you to wait a minute." And the boy bursts into tears. My manager was right there and she was in a fury. She started yelling at the guy that he was a jerk and a horrible person and told him to get the heck out of her store and never come back. The guy was like, "Mind your own business. This is my kid and I can do what I want." And she said, "Leave now before I call the police." So the man hitched the boy up by his arm and practically dragged him out of the store. The worst part, they were less than 10 feet from the bathroom the entire time. That poor kid. I hope that kid ended up peeing all over the inside of Dad's car, because you know what? He deserves it. I used to babysit for a very dysfunctional family. The mom got knocked up on purpose so the dad wouldn't leave her. Subsequently, the dad hated the mom and resented the child. I know this because they fought about it often, publicly, and in front of the child. When I would arrive, the baby would always have a very dirty diaper that had obviously been like that for many, many hours. The baby's first word was her own name and then my name. Not mama or dada, her own 3 freaking syllable name. One day, the child had no milk or baby food left, and the mom goes to the store and comes back with just a pack of cigarettes. I asked her why she didn't get anything for the baby, and she said, "Well, I didn't have enough for both and I don't get paid till Friday." It was Wednesday and she was just gonna let the kid go hungry for 3 days. There was nothing edible in the house. I absolutely lost it. I don't think I've ever raged out on someone so bad in my entire life. I let her have it for a good 10 minutes, screaming at the top of my lungs the litany of reasons why she was a failure as a parent, and how I was going to call CPS if things didn't change. Anyways, she burst into tears and took the cigarettes back and came home with milk. So I guess it kinda worked. I ended up making pureed veggies at home and bringing them to the little girl for the rest of the week. They moved away shortly after that, and I always wondered what happened to the little girl. Let's just hope that your reality check to her had a long-term impact. I teach first graders, and I'm convinced most parents should not be raising children. Here's my most recent story. One day, I start afternoon class and I ask my students how they're doing. One girl says bad, and I ask her why. She says that she's hungry because she didn't eat lunch. I ask her why she hasn't had lunch yet, and she says it's because her mom was playing on the computer and she forgot to feed them, and then didn't have time. How the heck do you forget to feed a 7-year-old? Later, I brought her a snack when I had a minute because there's no way I could let a kid go without food. Unfortunately, it's always the kid that suffers in these situations. I recently had an encounter from the other end of the spectrum. I was cycling through the downtown area when I passed this Chinese lady who let her tiny kid, I'm guessing around 3 or 4 years old, walk on the street side of her. And just as I passed, this kid is making some excited gestures at his mom, happily gibbering about something while simultaneously pretty much running backwards right into the side of me, while I'm cycling at full speed. He goes flying backwards. I'm pretty sure I hit him right in the face with my knee. I stop, horrified, to check if the kid is okay. He's making this face like he's inhaling a huge breath of air to start bawling. But before I can get off the cycle or he can start screaming, his mom looks back, sees what's going on, and just snips a few words of Chinese at him. The kid just looks at her and instantly regains his composure, with obvious effort. I'm pretty sure he's hurt, but he quietly just runs right back up to her. The lady just smiles and waves at me and walks off at a brisk pace with her kid, and I'm just left standing there looking completely stumped at the bystanders who seem just as confused. That kid is going to grow up tough, even if it kills him. I'm pretty sure his mom's going to make sure of that. At the end of the day, kids will be kids and accidents happen. Things like this sometimes can't be avoided. Mom was probably of the mind that if she just doesn't acknowledge it as a bad thing, the kid won't either and they can just move on. If he was really hurt, he would have let you guys know. I used to work at a crappy gas station / convenience store. One day, a woman comes up to the counter with her daughter. She places on the counter hot dogs, hot dog buns, Kraft mac and cheese, and a 6-pack of Corona. She then asks me for a pack of cigarettes. After ringing up all the items, she swipes her debit card and it doesn't go through. She tries several times. After about the 4th time, she turns to this little girl who couldn't be older than 6. And I kid you not, she says, "Looks like you won't be eating tonight," and walks away, leaving her little girl at the counter tearing up. I was dumbfounded, and before I could say anything, the little girl yells to me, "You're a big meanie," and ran out of the door crying. Worst Thanksgiving ever. I mean, she could have tried putting some stuff back to see if it would go through at that point. Maybe the beer and cigarettes. You know, just priorities. While queuing in a coffee shop in England, 2 police officers walked in the door and went straight up to the agitated-looking woman in front of me. They started questioning her about her son, asking when she had last seen him, how old he was, what he was wearing, things like that. So it was fairly evident from the conversation that she had quite recently lost her 6-year-old kid. Both officers kept confusedly looking around the shop until the woman felt obliged to explain why she was in there, saying, "I'm gonna look for him. I'm getting me and my husband a coffee first. Go on ahead, we'll catch up." After picking up my order, I turned around to see them both sitting at a table drinking their coffees like not even a single care was given. As I walked out the door, I saw the woman peer out the front window, looking for her son, I suppose. Yeah, she doesn't seem to have as much urgency as you would think, does she? I was at the store with my dad, and we see this woman take her baby's bottle and pour Mountain Dew into it before giving it back to the kid. This is a baby, no more than a year old. My dad goes up to the lady and asks if she really just gave Mountain Dew to the kid, and she replies, "Yeah, he likes it, so I give it to him. I always give him what he wants." I fear for that generation. I was at the mall once and there was a young family in front of me. The little brat in the high chair didn't like the cheeseburger from McDonald's they got him. So he wailed and screamed and then picked up the cheeseburger and threw it at the dad, painting his shirt with ketchup and mustard. The dad then went up and got the kid another meal. I remember thinking if I did that to my dad, I wouldn't have made it out of the mall alive. Look, sometimes you gotta discipline your kid. I get it, they're your kid, but you can't let them get away with stuff like this. You're not doing them any favors. I saw a kid, probably 5 or 6, walking with his dad to soccer practice. They walk to one pitch and there's no one there, and the kid says, "Oh, sorry, we're over there," pointing to another field, maybe 150 yards away. The dad slaps the kid on the back of the head and calls him stupid and other names. Some kids have no chance. Like, come on, that's such a small mistake and you're gonna go ahead and smack the kid for it? Who's being the child in that situation? I went to a barbecue thrown by a friend of a friend. There was a woman who showed up with their ex-husband and his new girlfriend. All three were drunk and a bit too friendly with each other, while alternating name-calling. With them was a 2 or 3-year-old little girl, cute as can be with a real light about her. I vaguely remember them telling very inappropriate stories. When the little girl says she's hungry, the father goes and gets the bag of McDonald's he'd been grazing out of and pulls out a near-full container of fries. He proceeds to grab a few and then throw them on the lawn. The girl, without missing a beat, runs around picking them up off the lawn and eats them. He repeats this over and over in front of all the other adults, who didn't seem to take issue. It was like a game to him that he was clearly enjoying. Mom even smiled at it. My wife and I promptly left the party. This guy's treating his daughter like an animal. Someone needs to call CPS. I was lining up at the register at some store, and there was a girl around 10ish and her mom in front of me. And the little girl asked her mom if she can get the Harry Potter books because they're on sale. And the mom replies, "Why do you need the stupid books for? We got a big television you can watch the movies on." God forbid some kids want to read nowadays. I worked at the YMCA in Houston, and we did programs that reached lower-income neighborhoods, the kind full of crime and poverty. One day we were letting the kids go, and we watched the rides leave as a security issue. One of the kids had made a drawing earlier that he was particularly proud of, and showed it to his dad, gleaming. The dad immediately snatched it out of the boy's hand, ripped up the drawing, and smacked the kid, in full view of us employees. He went on about how he shouldn't be doing homosexual stuff like drawing, and smacked him a couple more times. Needless to say, we called the authorities and he was arrested for child abuse, or something similar. How does this man think he's gonna get away with something like that in full view of everyone who's very much interested in this kid's well-being? I've been a nanny for a little over 5 years, so I've seen my fair share of crazy families. But there's one babysitting job that sticks out more than any other. The ex's mom referred me to her hairdresser, so when she called me, I was pretty excited to go to her house. I was watching a 4-year-old boy that everyone raved about being so adorable and fun. He sure was cute, but fun is not the word I would use to describe that night. She left telling me she would be home anywhere between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. Came home at 4 a.m. and got mad at me for falling asleep on the couch. The kid had the worst ADHD I've ever experienced before, and there was absolutely no food or drink in the fridge, other than margarita mix and a 2-week-old half-gallon of milk, which he said he drank earlier that day. All of the sippy cups that they owned smelled like rotten eggs. I felt so bad for this boy. I looked through every drawer to see if I could find anything to give him, and all I managed to find was workout supplements, steroids, needles, and lots of different pills like phentermine and ephedrine. I bought him some dinner, got them a fresh gallon of milk, and never came back to that house again. Another case of the parents are crappy people and the kid suffers. We went to a soft play center with my niece the other day. One boy managed to find this big red ball and jam it at the bottom of the slide. His little brother then proceeded to go down the slide and get stuck. Chaos ensued for a while as they tried to get the boy out. The parents were going on and on at the staff. Eventually, they swindled a free drink out of the place. Then they gave their daughter a lollipop, no food is allowed in the actual play area, and she ran around the play area and climbed the stairs to come down the slide. We were watching all of this whilst keeping an eye on my niece, basically getting her to stay out of the way. The parents made barely any effort to get the lolly off her. She then went into this little viewing thing made of perspex with the lolly in her mouth and was dribbling. Her drool then proceeded to drip down to where we were sitting. We promptly left after being completely grossed out. This is by far the nastiest family I've ever come across, and a very good argument for contraception. Yeah, some parents are a walking billboard for reasons to not have kids. In high school, I made friends with this really shy guy who stuttered and was generally socially awkward, but really nice. He was also a genius pianist. He was taking 2 years for one at his piano courses. He was composing amazing pieces at the age of 16, and I truly admired his ability. His parents, however, didn't see it that way. They were both engineers, and they considered his love for music despicable, worthless, and a bad habit that needs to be uprooted. When he was practicing at home, they taught tossed old shoes at him, and they made him sleep on the floor if he played for more than 2 hours. Once a professor from the musical academy called them to tell them that they have an amazing son and that he could be famous one day. They hung up the phone. When high school was over, he really wanted to apply to the musical academy, but they didn't let him. They said that the only courses they would ever fund were the ones in math and geography, the qualifying subjects for the economy university. So he had to go there for his higher education. I haven't seen him in a good while, but I heard he went abroad. I hope he escaped those jerks for good. It really sucks to see kids who have an amazing amount of talent and parents that just don't support them the way they need to. My mom is a teacher at a primary school in England in a really bad part of town. The stories she brings home are appalling, from kids who have never been read to or even talked to much who come to school age 5 without being able to speak in proper sentences. Also, the saddest things often involve parenting from the previous generation. The standout event being a mother who came into My Mother, the music teacher, and SBS, that she doesn't know any nursery rhymes to sing to her children, which was one of the set tasks for bonding type homework. She spent an hour with that woman teaching her Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. I was at a mall playground with the wife and 2 kids. My son was 3 years old and was running around with about 20 other kids, most of them his age. Keep in mind that kids can't be taller than 3 feet to play in this little playground. There was this one fat woman and she was watching about 4 kids, and all of them were taller than 4 feet and they were playing rough, pushing each other around and whatnot. My son goes around the area that they were playing at and starts playing by himself, and one of the kids tries to kick my son. My wife, who's 5'2" and 100 pounds, calmly walks that way with my 3-month-old daughter and tells the woman, who's like 5'6" and about 250 pounds, to watch her kids because they were playing a little rough. She said, "Okay, whatever." My wife stays there and watches just in case something happens. The older kid goes running towards my son and pushes him. My wife tells the kid, who's about 9, not to push my son. The woman flips the heck out and starts screaming, "Don't scream at my baby," and blah blah blah. My wife tells her that she should pay more attention to her kids and how they're too old to be playing around smaller kids. She tells my wife to shut up and not to tell her how to raise her kids. My wife starts walking away and the woman starts getting louder. So from my seat 15 feet away, I yell at her, "You do not talk to my wife that way. Your kids are misbehaving and you're doing nothing about it. Learn how to be a good parent." She shuts up and looked at me in disbelief. She didn't know I was with my wife, or that I would talk to her like that in front of so many people. She then started to talk crap again, and we ignored her. After 5 minutes of her ridiculousness, my wife got the security guard and she got her butt kicked out of the place. 15 minutes after, she passes doing threatening signs at my wife, but when I looked at her, she stopped and looked away. I was seriously raging and about to beat her, but I did my best to calm down and be a responsible adult. I totally get it, my friend. Interactions like that get your blood boiling, especially if someone's gonna go threatening me and mine. "If you don't wear these pink shoes I'm buying you, I'm gonna cut all your rabbits' heads off." Sadly, that was actually my dad talking to a 10-year-old me in a thrift store. He then proceeded to get into an argument with a woman who said, "You're the most horrible person I've ever heard in my life," and called her a man-hater and a lesbian before we finally left. Compared to some of the other stuff, that's relatively mild. Yeah, my childhood sucked. I was at a movie theater and we had just walked in and sat down in our seats since the theater we were going to was open. An employee, probably around 35 years old, walks in and asks everyone, a small handful of people, to leave for just a few minutes so we can clean it. He had a stutter and some type of mild disability. The employee was super friendly and nice about having to ask us all to leave. This dad with a beer belly and cut off sleeves who was there with his 3 preteen and teen kids started making fun of the employee and the way he spoke, joking, mimicking, and trying to get his kids to join in with him. I chewed that jerk out. How are you gonna set an example like that for your kids? This guy's being super friendly, working hard, and you're gonna give him a hard time because of the way he speaks, which he can't control, by the way. Some people really shouldn't breed. I worked as a waitress for about 4 years. One family was very rude and demanding every time they ate there. Their children, ranging from 5 to 10 years old, would snap at me or shake their cups to get my attention. When we didn't come right away, the children would literally start screaming, while the parents laughed. Another family had a 12-year-old daughter that would take all the sugar packets from the table and play with them. Much of the sugar ended up on the floor or on the table. Once I figured out what she was doing, I would go take away the basket before they sat down. Lastly, I only saw this family in there once, but it was a tatted up gangster couple. The mom was no older than 23, and they had 4 kids. Let them run around the restaurant untamed and basically ignored them the entire time. They made a mess of the tables and didn't even tip. Oh, and they also tried stealing quarters off this cancer research donation thing we had. I work customer service at Loblaws part-time while I go to school. Lucky me. I've grown resentful of people. One day, I encountered a lady who was absolutely flabbergasted that her milk, on which the expiry date was clearly written, had gone bad. She was going on and on complaining. Had the store manager called down, the front end manager, and the dairy manager too. Once this whole ordeal was handled, she turns to her 14-year-old daughter and says, "Now that's how it's done." As someone who worked in customer service and retail for a good portion of their life, I hate people like this. Don't be teaching your kids to be the same jerk you are. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I think it should be mandatory that every person has to work at least 2 years in customer service, just to learn to be a little humble. For the teachers out there, what are some stories about horrible parents you've had to deal with? I have a student who, while out on the playground, slapped another kid in the face. He was obviously taken into the office where the student then claimed that the wind blew his hand and that's what caused the slapping action. But it wasn't actually him. It was just the wind. It was a nice, sunny, mildly breezy day. Not at all possible. The student was in the office for physical aggression towards another student and looking at a 1-day in-school suspension. Clearly not his first offense. The principal calls home per the standard protocol in our district, and the parents believed his story, so much so that the parents actually came in with a lawyer to meet with the principal, and to get all the charges dropped. Despite 2 noon aides and a kid with a nice red mark on his face, this student was sitting back in my classroom in the afternoon getting off completely for a blatant attack on another student. I feel like all he learned from this experience is that he can do whatever he wants, and his parents will let him get away with it to the best of their ability. These parents actually dragged their lawyer into the principal's office? Come on. A student of mine, first grade, came to school every day without a jacket, and when asked about it, he told me his jacket was too small and his family couldn't afford a bigger one. When winter came around, I raided the closet in the front office for a donated jacket for him. He lucked out, and there was a brand new jacket with matching hat and mittens in there, so I put them in a box I had laying around and tucked them into his backpack. They were a little big, so I hoped he'd grow into them. I told him there was a present for him in his backpack, but to wait until he got home to open it, as to not leave him vulnerable to questions and taunting from his classmates. The next day was warmer, so I wasn't shocked to see him without the coat. However, what was shocking was that his mother showed up at pickup in the family's SUV wearing that jacket. I had to have a talk with the poor guy and arrange for a recess jacket for him that he left in his cubby so his mom wouldn't take another one. You know, most decent parents would put their kids first and not steal the clothing off their back. My mom is a kindergarten teacher, and she had this one terrible student who not only kicked her in the face while she was helping him with his work, but he actually stole her digital camera from her desk drawer. She keeps it at work to take pictures of kids' projects and events and stuff to share with parents. His parents suggested that my mom shouldn't bend down to help students lest she be within kicking range, and to leave her valuables at home. I have a feeling we're going to have a lot of stories like this where parents are just raising little monsters. I don't think I have any worst stories, but I mostly notice a lot of trends. Parents are starting to tell teachers not to bother them with details about their child's education. For example, little Johnny's failing. Why are you calling me about that? I also notice quite a large number of parents who don't try to discipline their children at all. I had a student who was doing poorly and was always falling asleep in class. I called the father to talk and notify him about the marks, and to suggest that maybe he needed more sleep. The father said, "What am I supposed supposed to do about that? It's actually quite a common statement. The parents that bothered me the most were the parents of a boy with special needs. Every day they sent him the same lunch, macaroni with nothing on it. I asked them at the first conference why they did this, and his mom said, "It's not like he'll notice." It was sad because he really did notice. When we had special lunch days, he would get so excited about hot dogs or pizza. It's indicative of how well they treated him overall, and they didn't try to engage or stimulate him. I was one of 4 teachers in a conference with Dee's mother and a school counselor. I was the last of the teachers to talk, but I said much the same as the other teachers. Dee skips class all the time, yells out constantly, never does his work, and regularly calls you over to ask questions before farting. Dee was awful. Who behaves like that in 10th grade? Anyway, after all 4 of the teachers said essentially the same thing, Dee's mom looked at the counselor and asked, "I don't understand why all these teachers are lying about my son." Dee's 2 older brothers were in jail. I assume Dee followed in their footsteps. Sounds like this lady's just clueless. Not from a classroom, but I had this one parent of a kid in my Girl Guide unit who was just awful. When we first met her kid, she would always ask questions about everything, didn't listen to instructions, and would then ask questions about everything she missed, and was generally clueless. Then we met her mother, and it all made sense. The first time we met her, she tried to sell us life insurance. That was her job. And in the first 5 minutes of talking to her, she started about 4 topics, yet never finished any of them. She drove around in an uninsured car, the irony, and would often offer to pick up or drop off other people's kids as well. She was also always late for everything. Last to drop off, last to pick up. Here's where the story gets even worse. I guess she used to homeschool her kids, which is scary to think about. In grade 1, she put her kid in public school. Every time she had a problem with the school her kid attended, she pulled her kid from the school and moved her to another school. It got to the point where the kid had gone to 4 different schools in less than a year. Her learning was severely behind, and it was hard for her to make and keep friends. I feel so sorry for whatever poor teachers had to deal with this mom. I was a humanities teacher briefly, and I had a meeting with the mother of a boy due to his ongoing behavior problems in class. Bright kid, very creative, just couldn't stop distracting some of his classmates. No biggie, really. Mom brought our meeting to a premature end by announcing, "Readings for homosexuals," and storming out of the room, yanking her kid along behind her. Poor kid never had a chance. Not a teacher, technically, I'm a juvenile counselor. But on Monday, I saw a kid who was brought in by her aunt and uncle. Dad was in jail and mom was a junkie. I kept trying to help them come up with rewards for good behavior, like trips to the zoo, family picnic, an hour of outside playtime with the kid, and they just kept saying how no one likes her and how she hates everything. Worst was, when I was asking the kid what happens when you steal, that was her crime, she said, "You get abandoned." Ugh, that one will hit you right in the gut, won't it? One of my best friends is a French teacher who came from France and became an American citizen. He's white and after living here for about 5 years, got a job in a majority black school. After he taught there for a few months, a mom decided to play the race card, came storming into his classroom and said her daughter said he was the biggest racist she'd ever seen, then threatened to get him fired. He let her rant and rave in front of the class, and when she finally paused for a breath, he turned around his wedding picture. He's married to a black woman. He said her mouth dropped open, but no sound came out, and she kinda slunk out of the classroom. His kids were crying, they were laughing so hard. My mom is a special ed teacher. She had a parent-teacher meeting with the parents of a severely disturbed young man with multiple problems. During the conference, the mother casually asked, "I'm not really sure, but do you think that maybe the reason my son has so many problems is because I smoked meth every day while I was pregnant with him?" The whole room was in stunned silence for about 30 seconds before my mom piped up with, yes. I agree. That's probably the reason. Most laughable experience I've had was with a plagiarism case. Kid had ripped his entire essay off the internet. I'd googled a few sentences from his assignment and found the page where he got the stuff from and printed it out so the kid could see that the 2 copies were word for word. He aggressively denied it, so we got his mom in for an interview. I showed her the submitted assignment and the webpage printout, and her answer was that her dopey 15-year-old boy had actually written the Wikipedia entry on the Treaty of Versailles, so it wasn't plagiarism at all. Nothing like supportive parents. I teach at a dance studio, and last week some of my 2-year-olds just kept biting their arms for unknown reasons. When class was over, I let the moms know, and one of them looked at me and went, "She would never!" My mouth kind of dropped as I tried to gather words, and she quickly said, "No, I'm just kidding. I just wanted to see what it would be like to be one of those parents for a second." She scared the crap out of me for a minute there. If I become a parent, I'm gonna do this at least once. I've had my fair share of parental horror stories, as it seems most of us teachers have had, but I think it's time for a pick-me-up. I teach digital arts and technology at an inner-city public high school in a gang-infested, poverty-ridden, but culturally bright neighborhood. Last year, a student of mine, let's call him A, stole a MacBook laptop out of my classroom. After scouring video footage in detail, I identified the student who took it. The kid lied repeatedly to me about not taking it, and security couldn't find it on him or anywhere else at all. After escaping security, A picked up the laptop from another student, who he planted the laptop on earlier in the day, took it home, painstakingly cleaned the white keyboard and casing with a Q-tip, then promptly sold it to some dudes on the street for $500 cash. 2 days later, a random girl tells me about how A planted the laptop on the random kid. The accomplice admits, security calls A back in, and gets his father into the school. Dad is furious with A. He takes A into their car and makes A drive through the streets of the hood to find the dudes he sold the laptop to. Dad forces A to buy the laptop back from the guys he sold it to for a markup price of $600, which A paid. The next morning, Dad makes A return the laptop back to my classroom in better condition than when he stole it. Not one file missing and sparkling white MacBook. There's hope for us yet. We had to squeeze in at least one good parent, right? My stepfather was having parent-teacher conferences, and he was talking to this kid's parents. The parents had a question about when my stepfather was going to go over the Civil War. My stepfather said it would be in about a week or so. The parents said, "Great, because we'll pull our kid from the unit. We believe the Civil War never happened, and we're under the Confederate government." My stepfather was flabbergasted and didn't know how to respond. Then the parents got up and said to him, "We'll also pull our kid for the World War II unit because the Holocaust was made up and never happened." Some people just love to believe what they want to believe, don't they? I could list all the terrible phone calls, conferences, and emails where parents blame everything except their child's actions for the reason they're in trouble. They're so numerous, I can't even begin to count them. The one that's different than all of those, and the only one like it that I've encountered, was one with one of my AP English students. It was a typical parent-teacher conference. AP parents were flying in and out, since almost all the kids are doing well. This one super sweet girl and her mother come in and sit down. I tell them she is a 99% in the class. 99% total, as in an A+. Without missing a beat, the mom looks at her daughter with big time attitude and says, "What can we do to get that to 100? My mouth dropped. I said, "Well, we still have a semester, so there's time for extra credit." And then I made a mistake of adding, "But you know a 99 is really great." That was a mistake. The mom jumps out of her chair and starts yelling at me that I should mind my own business, and that she has high expectations of her daughter to become more than just a high school teacher. I hate parents, which is why I don't plan on ever becoming one. This mom needs a reality check. Her daughter's doing great. You have no need to be so hard on her. No worse story, but after 25 plus years in the classroom, I can tell you that awful kids generally have truly messed up parents. It's pretty shocking, really. Frequently horrible, in fact. We've had teachers physically attacked during parent conferences in our nice little town in the heart of America, and the parents get a slap on the wrist. I like teaching and have had a rewarding career, but I would not do it again. I don't want my kid to become a teacher either. That really says a lot, doesn't it? A story from my friend who's a high school teacher. A student turned in an exam with suspiciously similar solutions to a person near them. From past performance and the seating arrangement, it was clear which one of them was copying. My friend had some of the other teachers look through the exams to see if they would notice the same thing, which they all did. The student's mother came in and said that the teacher just didn't like her daughter, and was just accusing her of cheating for that reason. When the principal said that several other teachers agreed with the assessment that her daughter had cheated, the mother said, "Well, then the teacher put her next to a good student to force her to cheat so she would get in trouble." I'm sorry, what? Is this lady delusional? My mother is a teacher. This is only the worst one. There are more. She was teaching a class in elementary school that had a severely mentally handicapped girl in it. I'm talking constant drooling, unable to form words, just grunts and moans and yells. She clearly belonged in special ed, but her parents refused. They insisted she be put in a normal class because she doesn't need special ed. The classes were completely useless for her, and her noise and mess seriously disrupted the education of 30 other students. The school even had to pay an aide to be with her all day because she couldn't take care of herself. When the school finally decided to go ahead and put her in special ed, the parents sued the district because apparently their 12-year-old with the mentality of a 3 to 4-year-old did not belong in special ed in their minds. Teachers had to spend their days in court instead of their classrooms, and my mom had to deal with lawyers and parents telling her she had no idea what was best for their kid. The only winners in this scenario are the lawyers. My dad is a principal and once suspended a girl for wearing a shirt that showed her whole stomach and then refused to put on another shirt to cover herself up. This was not her first or her worst offense, and he was fed up. The parents came in to discuss the situation. The dad didn't want to believe his daughter should be suspended, so he attempted to lunge at my dad and fight him. He called him all kinds of names and said he was going to mess him up. I can't remember, but I think the dad ended up getting arrested. My story isn't so bad, but I once worked with a parent who was really racist and tried to build a completely ridiculous case about why her son couldn't work with our black instructors. She wouldn't even look at them. Other than that, I'm constantly dealing with parents who are completely in denial about their children's abilities and have insane expectations, which is pretty horrible. All parents want their kids to be amazing and be the best, but let's be honest, not all of them have that potential. My wife is an experienced teacher. We live in a fairly rural northern area, and the school she just left is in one of the poorer towns. Typical bad was going an entire year without ever seeing a kid's parents or getting any response to correspondence. Also typical was kids without coats, hats, or gloves. She collected from our friends and left extras out in class. She had her personal property stolen all the time. Worse, kids dealing in the 7th and 8th grade, girls cutting and drinking and things like that, to dealing with assault trauma, girls pregnant, boys with fractured skulls, lost eyes, and fights with older boys and adults. Worst was a stretch of 7 years in which every year she had at least one of the following: kid's parent murdered, kid murdered, one time 2 in 1 year, kid's parent murdered the other parent, kid's parent took their own life, or kid's parent murdered another parent then took their own life. I finally convinced her she's paid her dues, and she needed to take a break for her own sanity. Making $20K less now at an alternative school, but doesn't cry every day. That's gotta be a heartbreaking situation to have to deal with every day for years. I can't begin to imagine. I had a student whose mother had divorced his father and both had remarried. He lived with his mom and stepdad, and his biological dad wasn't in his life. Just before his freshman year of high school, this was the year I had him, his biological father allegedly assaulted his stepdaughter and was facing possible jail time. For reasons that are a complete mystery to me, my student's mom started giving all the money she could to the father to help pay for legal expenses. I have no clue why she would do this, and especially why the stepdad would agree to it. My student had no winter coat and received nothing for Christmas because they couldn't afford it. All the money went to his deadbeat dad instead of him and his siblings, and he had a 5-year-old sister with special needs. The saddest part, he told me he was sure his father was guilty. Why would you take away money from a child who has all kinds of potential to give it to a scumbag who's just going to be going to prison? We had an over-attentive and incredibly enthusiastic parent of a 4-year-old girl that suffered from shaken baby syndrome. The child was very emotionally stunted, couldn't walk, and could barely speak. It was really sad, and she wasn't making much progress. Whenever we would get time to talk to her mother about her daughter's care, she would immediately change the direction of the conversation to be about herself. There also were several stories floating around in regard to how her child got this way. Absolutely none of them made sense and were constantly changing. Without giving away a lot of personal information, over time it became pretty obvious that super special ed mom had some kind of Munchausen by proxy. But we had no proof, and just had to watch the little girl for any other signs of abuse, such as incorrect medications, cuts, or bruises, and if found, report it to a nurse and guidance counselor that would alert CPS. I left a few months after this drama and never heard any follow-up about it. My first and only year teaching 8th grade was a doozy. I was 21, and all my energy and excitement about teaching was quickly zapped by parents dead set on proving me incapable of doing my job. I had parents sending graded papers back to me with my comments corrected and challenged. One day, I was called into the headmaster's office to discuss my use of foul language in the classroom after a parent learned I had told a kid to stop dorking around. The worst by far was a mother who somehow got my cell number and just constantly harassed me at the end of the year, all because she wanted her child to get a wholly undeserved A. This mother had a reputation, but I was in no way prepared for her full-out abuse. When her daughter, whom I'd repeatedly suggested to receive some kind of outside academic assistance, ended up with a generous B- in the class, she just lost it. I was visiting my sick grandmother when she started texting me, demanding to see the final exams. Being as they were final exams, I was not intending to return them to the students. However, this woman had the headmaster so wrapped up in her crazy that he called me and requested that I have my landlord open my house door so someone could go grab the exams while I was out of town. This is on top of the mom's text messages like, "You'll never work again," and "Those tests are mine. I paid for them. I want what I deserve." At what point does this kind of thing become harassment? I had a student who dressed in the goth fashion, black pants and metal band t-shirt, long hair and polished nails. He was bullied relentlessly by boys, girls, and even other teachers. Every day I'd try to fend off the verbal abuse, knowing my classroom was the only 45-minute reprieve he would get. Soon he joined science club just so he'd have a pass to eat in my room at lunch instead of the cafeteria. He was a really smart kid. He easily aced the tests and helped along the other students with labs. I saw him building friendships in class. Then he started skipping school. He started missing my class and falling behind. When he came back after close to 2 weeks, he was even more withdrawn. He came to class and he turned in all the work he'd missed. He checked my website, but skipped out on science club. After a few days of this pattern and him refusing to talk to me, I called home. My intent was to tell his parents how worried I was for him. My worry was he might hurt himself. I said, "Hello, I'm calling about your son blank. I'm his biology teacher." Before I could go any further, his mom says, "I don't need to hear it. I'm pulling him out of school tomorrow. He's his own problem now." She hung up on me and I cried. I talked to my principal and student counselor and they promised they'd look into it. But he was withdrawn from school that week. He's still in my mind 5 years later. I'll always wonder what happened because I was a little goth kid once too. That's great that you reached out to this kid that you saw was having problems. You probably really did something great for them. Sometimes it's a shame the parents have as much control as they do. What's your, "Oh, so that's what it was for" moment that took you too long to find out? Those little green swords at Starbucks. I had no clue what they were used for until I was complaining one day that my coffee gets all over the lid when I walk. My friend grabbed one and stuck it in the top of the lid and asked why I didn't use a stopper. A stopper! Oh my god, my life has just changed. I just learned something too. Of course, I don't drink coffee, but anyway. I'm sure we're going to be learning a lot of things this video. Not me, but my dad. He always likes to look nice and put together. One day before church, I was maybe 14, I asked him if he had a lint roller. He got it for me and it was absolutely covered in lint. So I ripped off the top sheet. My dad's eyes widened in shock. "I always thought lint rollers were so expensive for how few times you could use them." He never knew there were more sheets underneath. Dad was in his mid-50s then. He hates when I tell that story. When I realized that the division sign is an empty fraction. Dude, you just blew my mind. That the approximately correct amount of loose leaf tea for 1 cup is a teaspoonful. That one makes sense. Not sure if this is a feature on all smoke detectors, but finally after 5 years of owning my house and getting used to grabbing a chair and knocking the batteries out of it, I just hit the test button on the front when it went off while cooking. Hush mode activated. It turns it off for 15 minutes and automatically turns itself back on. It felt like unlocking a secret character in Mortal Kombat. For years, I've had this electrical outlet on my back porch that's really intermittent. The thing works about half the time, then stops working for a couple weeks. Really frustrating. About 6 years after I bought the house, I also figured out what that one switch in the living room does. You know the plastic hooks on vacuum cleaners that are used to wind the cord around? Well, the top hook will spin 180 degrees to release the cord, so you don't have to spend time unwinding. I didn't realize this till my wife showed me well into my 30s. It took me 4 years of owning a car to realize I could spray washer fluid onto the rear windshield. I just assumed it only sprayed the front, and I would occasionally throw a bucket of water on the back if I needed to. Then one day, I just noticed an odd symbol on a lever I hadn't seen before. Held that mother down for about 10 seconds before a massive gush of liquid burst out of the back and changed my life for the better. I feel like that last sentence out of context could really go the wrong way for you. Clapperboards in movies. They're used as a visual reference to sync the audio and the video together in editing. Have you guys seen those escalators with the green lights shining through the steps? When I was very young, maybe 5 or 6 years old, I asked my dad what those lights were for. He told me they were for the blind. A few years ago maybe, when I was about 23 or 24, I got on one of those escalators with lights again with a friend of mine. I wanted to tell my friend this little fact that my dad had told me years ago about the lights in escalators. But as soon as I wanted to explain, I realized my dad was trolling me the whole time. It took me just under 20 years to realize it. I think we all have that one thing that we were told as a kid that took us way too long to realize wasn't true. I was a housekeeper for someone years back when I was in college. Side job, extra money. I would see short straws in random places at the house where I worked. I usually just picked them up and threw it in the trash can. It took me 2 years to realize the person I worked for had a drug addiction and he was using the straws to snort. Now I look back and I'm glad I wore gloves to clean other people's houses. I bought a used pickup truck in the late 90s that had an electronic key fob like any car does these days. It had a couple other buttons as well that, when pressed, seemed to do nothing. I asked them about it at the dealership and they told me it was probably for a remote start that wasn't hooked up. After 2 years of driving that truck around in cold Chicago winters, I sold the truck to my brother when I bought my first new car. One day while talking to him, he started the car up with the remote starter. I stared in complete shock as he explained that you have to hold the button down. It's always a humbling moment when someone knows how to use something that was yours better than you do. I had no idea that salad spinners were to dry your salad. I thought they were to mix your salad dressing or something. We got one as a wedding gift. So I loaded one up, dumped some dressing in, and it spun a ton of the dressing off the salad. This made me think that the product was to apply dressing flavor to all of your salad bits without dealing with all the extra calories that come from overloading on the dressing. So naturally, I thought it was a total waste of time and money and tossed it into a cabinet to never be used again. A year goes by and I see a comment on Reddit about how salad spinners are such a game changer and so worth it. And I thought people were just crazy. Nope, I'm the idiot here. They're to dry your washed salad bits so you have nice, crisp, non-soggy salad. I had no idea, and the box sure as heck didn't tell me that. I worked with a guy on a construction site and it took him 7 months to realize that the porta potties had urinals in them. He thought that the bowl was in there for a sink that they put in the nicer ones. Just today at the gym, I forgot my shower sandals and I was like, oh sweet, they have disposable slippers just in case of such an event. I put them on and walked through the change room, used them, they worked well, until I realized that they were shower caps. I mean, you can use them for that. After high school, I was working a temp job in a business remodel. The wood floors had been put in and the contractor had a big roll of paper that he taped down to cover the floor to prevent scuffs and scrapes while the work continued. One time I touched the roll of paper and noted that it was somewhat sturdier than normal paper and reminded me of the craft paper that we used in elementary school. Then I remembered that as a child, the teacher always called it construction paper. The bagel button on toasters only toasts one side of the bagels or bread or buns. When I was a kid, I had a large toy box with a lid. I had to use my head to prop up the lid when I grabbed things. There was a place to put a stick to prop it open. I noticed that there was a stick kept in the kitchen for me and my brother's spankings. By the time I realized the stick was originally meant for the toy box, I had outgrown the toy box. Your parents were essentially beating you with your toys? That's kinda messed up. The wiggly metal bracket on the end of a tape measure is like that on purpose. The amount it wiggles matches its thickness, so you can take inside measurements and push it in, or outside measurements and pull it out, and you'll get consistent measurements. I lived in the US for a year, and I was really annoyed about our light switches. They didn't lead to any lamps. There were no lamps in the ceiling at all, and I couldn't figure out why we had switches on the wall. I was also super annoyed that a few sockets worked sometimes, but not all the time. I never talked to our landlord because frankly, he scared me. And since I was moving back soon, I just figured I'd live with it. Fast forward 11 months when I visited a friend's house. I couldn't turn on her big floor lamp. Just do it like this, she said, and flipped the light switch on the wall. It turns out in America, light switches can lead to sockets in the wall. I can see how that would be incredibly frustrating to someone who's not used to it. For years, I thought those weird storage pod thingies some cars and vans have on the top of the roof were mini canoes. As in, I kinda thought that until I was like 24, but was too nervous to ask anyone. Since as long as I can remember, my mom has kept this creepy doll hung up on our wall in our garage, right next to the door to go into the house. The thing's a real eyesore. Clothes are ugly, and it's just this raggedy thing. So recently, I asked my mom why the heck she keeps this ugly demon doll hung up on the wall, and she says, "Really? It holds plastic bags." She walks up to it and pulls a plastic grocery bag out of its butt. 19 years in that house, and I always thought my mom just had some weird taste in decoration. To be fair, you could use anything as a plastic bag dispenser. It doesn't need to be this creepy doll. I think your mom's taste is still a little off. That I did not need to put eggs in the refrigerator egg holder one by one. That instead, I could put it on top of the eggs in the case and simply flip it over. Well, yeah, but then all your eggs are upside down. That dryer sheets prevent static cling. I always assumed you put them in to make your clothes smell better. So when I moved out, I just never bought any. Then one day I had to do laundry at my mom's house. In the middle of switching the laundry, I'm complaining about the socks all stuck to the blanket. And my mom says, "Well, put in a dryer sheet, dummy." Oh, so that's what those are for. Those travel toothbrushes. I always carried one on me and always wondered why they made them so tiny. Until one day on vacation with my girlfriend, I'm using it and she says, "Why don't you use it normally?" Then she grabs the casing for the toothbrush and attaches it to the bottom of the brush. Mind blown. I always wondered why there was a G in the stylized Disney logo, and it honestly took me like 15 years to figure out it was a D the whole time, and I was just an idiot. So I was a first-year medical student and was late to class and ran in sweating through my Oxford shirt and khakis. The lecturer was some esteemed local windbag cardiologist. As I sat down, he stated very grandly, "The most important part of the stethoscope is the part between the earpieces." I took my stethoscope out and started looking at the little spring thing that connected the two earpieces together, trying to figure out why that little cheap part was so important. After way longer than it should have, it occurred to me that he was talking about the doctor's brain, and dropped my stethoscope like it was hot and hoped no one saw me examining the little spring thing. Condensed soup. I always wondered why the cans were smaller yet tasted super salty and were thick. I never took the time to read the instructions about how you're supposed to add water. I went 39 years without knowing. One day, I finally asked my wife, and after she stopped laughing, she explained it to me. Growing up, my mother raised me to never look in her purse because it was rude to rifle through other people's belongings. At 7 years old, I felt like a rebel and looked through her purse while she was out gardening. I found her lipstick, wallet, and an odd-shaped canister that looked like perfume. I figured, let's give it a shot, and sprayed some all over me, mostly my face. What I didn't realize was that it was pepper spray. I ran around screaming in utter pain. Lesson learned. I mean, she tried to warn ya. When I was a kid, my grandfather and I built a model of the 1989 Batmobile together. We worked so hard to get it together. With neither of us having built models before, it took hours. We finished up and we had one green piece left. We looked through the instructions and looked all over the model. Could not figure it out. Finally, I went and got my grandma to see if she could figure it out. She came in, took one look, and it was the top of the superglue. We had forgotten to recap the superglue. You must never forget about the piece of resistance. Took me an embarrassingly long time to realize that movie is referring to a moving picture. It's an old-fashioned term, similar to talkie. The metal square thing on a stapler can be turned around so the prongs of the staple go outwards instead of inwards. It's a lot better for temporary staples, much easier to undo. I was at an antenatal class with my wife when the instructor shared a tip for making sure you let your baby feed from each breast an equal amount, by taking it in turns left and right which one you start off with. How do you remember which one you started with? You use a hair tie. A few minutes later she remarked, and don't forget to put the hair tie on your other wrist when you next do a feed. To which I remarked, rather too audibly for a room of 20 strangers, oh, you put it on your wrist. Oops, I was a bit slow that day, and many other days. For a split second while reading this, I thought the same thing. That the pockets on suit coats and blazers and back pockets of slacks are loosely stitched closed and meant to be cut open. I spent 4 years of my life as a ticked-off pragmatist. Why the heck would you put pockets just for show? Those jerks. One day, a friend heard my incessant complaining and goes, you just make a small snip and pull the thread out, then the pockets are accessible. I go to the closet and snip open one of the pockets. Well, don't I feel stupid? I had just bought my first house and needed to patch a hole in the bathroom fan exhaust duct in the attic. I was walking around Lowe's thinking, I wonder what sort of tape I should use for ducks. Then it hit me. Duct tape for ducks. Thank you, my friend. I never put that together. Potato peelers have a little indentation on the end of them. It's used to scoop out the black parts of potatoes that you don't want to eat. My mind alternates in this thread from, I didn't know that and it's really cool, to how the heck did someone not know that? Pipe cleaners. When I was a kid, they were used for crafts and stuff, and I just figured that they were used to clean like kitchen pipes. In my kid brain, that kinda made sense. As I grew up, I just never really thought about it again. Then one day in college, I decide cigars are expensive and pipe tobacco seems much cheaper overall. Plus, the rustic feel of a man on his porch reading with a tobacco pipe always appealed to me for some reason. So I went out and bought a cheap tobacco pipe, and while I was checking out, the cashier asked me if I wanted pipe cleaners. The scales just dropped from my eyes. It took 20 plus years to learn that pipe cleaners were used to clean, pipes. I've been driving my Chevy Silverado for 9 years before I realized I could lower the seat height. It had been at max elevation the entire time. First time in the past decade I've been able to see the sky out of my windshield while driving. Q-tips. I'm British. We don't call them Q-tips, and I didn't know what they were until I was in my mid-20s and saw a meme with a photo of a Q-tip. I was genuinely shocked. People never actually use them in books or films. They just say stuff like, I think you need a Q-tip, if someone misunderstands something. I thought it was like saying, get a clue, and I'd always just assumed Q-tips were a reference to some kind of American game show. This one's just a cultural difference and a very easy mistake to make. Don't worry, we understand. In the song I Saw Mommy Kissing Santa Claus, it's Daddy dressed up as Santa Claus. I didn't realize this until my late 30s. Yeah, the song takes on a whole new meaning when you realize Mom and Dad are just doing a little role play. Grapes on the front of raisin packages. My girlfriend told me last year that raisin and grapes are the same thing, and I laughed it off because that's nonsense. Then I saw a big grape on my raisin box. Yes, and I'm 33 years old. I never got the euphemism of Blink-182's album, Take Off Your Pants and Jacket. I just thought it was a dude getting ready for bed or something, not taking off your pants and jacking it. That makes total sense considering the band. My boyfriend was around 21 when I had to explain this to him, but he asked me to have dinner at his parents' house and I asked what we were having, and he said roast beast, and I laughed at him making a Grinch joke, and then he asked me what I was talking about. I mentioned that he called roast beef roast beast, and that the Grinch reference was funny. And I realized he seriously had no idea what I was talking about. So I had to reveal to my boyfriend that roast beast is not an actual thing. It's called roast beef, and roast beast was strictly a Dr. Seuss reference. He was a little embarrassed, but it was really actually so adorable. I have a similar one to this in that I called it grilled cheese for the longest time instead of grilled cheese. It's just the way my ear heard it for some reason. I know it doesn't make sense. I learned at 27 how to properly clean a toaster. I didn't know there was a trap door at the bottom of it. I showed an Ivy League friend of mine and their mind was blown. You know, we all have gaps in knowledge sometimes, and sometimes they overlap with your friend. The fact that pineapples don't grow on trees. They're just plants. I didn't know this until I was hanging out with my friend and we were swimming in her pool. I got out and pointed to what looked to me to be a weird spiky looking plant, and she looked at me completely dumbfounded. She just looked at me and said in a disappointed voice, "That's a pineapple." I felt like my whole life at this point was just a lie. For the longest time, I genuinely thought pineapples grew on trees. That the reason baby vests have envelope shoulders is so that when they do a poop that explodes all over the vest, you can remove the vest downwards instead of lifting it over their head and smearing poop all over their face. When you first walk into a Home Depot, there's always a stack of orange buckets by the entrance. And for the longest time, I thought they were Home Depot's equivalent of a shopping basket. I'd haul that thing around just throwing screws and hardware into it and then just put it next to the cash register when I was done. They'd always ask if I wanted the bucket too, and I just thought it was a clever way of selling more buckets. Only about a month ago did I realize they're just buckets, and everyone at Home Depot just thought I was mentally imbalanced. Hey, you know what? You're making use of it. I'm not going to fault you on that one. When I finally figured out why Dad's special cigarettes smelled so different from regular cigarettes, then his room full of blacklights, incense, psychedelic art, and old-fashioned pipes made a lot of sense. I got my driver's license while only using the clutch pedal for driving in reverse. I didn't even know you had to use your accelerator until my girlfriend pointed it out after having my license for over a year. I would think the instructor would have caught that one, but I guess that's on them, not you. When I was little, I was fascinated by TV guides. I thought shows on television were just aired totally at random. I used to stare at the TV guides and whisper, "How do they know?" The image of this one is just kinda cute. As a toddler, I always loved it in church when we'd sing about some bear named Gladly, and who happened to be cross-eyed. Every time it painted a cute picture in my child mind. A cuddly teddy bear with crossed eyes and a sweet smile. I'll never forget the disappointment of learning to read and opening the hymn book for the first time to Gladly the Cross-Eyed Bear. I had to explain to a friend of mine who was 19 at the time that large people were obese, not a beast. I have earbud headphones, and where the cord splits, there was this slider thing. The whole time I thought it was something to adjust the length or something. Then I found myself untangling my headphones, and I said to myself, if these two ends didn't split up, things wouldn't be so bad. Then it hit me. That sliding thing was there to keep the ends together and stop it from getting tangled. Some people also use it to just tighten it up to your chin if you're going to be moving around and working out or something, but that's one way to use it too, I guess. Not me, but my brother. He would have been around 15 at the time. We were at an amusement park in line for lunch. My mother turns to him and asks what he wants. He pauses for a sec, then says, "I want a cheeseburger, but with no cheese." At this point, I do what any older brother does and start to laugh a little bit and ask him the question again. Same response. At this point, he knows he's doing something stupid. So I ask him, "You mean a hamburger, right?" He says, "I don't want ham." You know, I can see how that could be misleading though. Parents of Reddit, what's the most absurd thing you found on your kid's social media? Not technically a parent, but an older sister. My little brother, when he was around 7-ish, had a search history of naked women and such. And when my mother found out and confronted him, he cried and was saying he just wanted to be like Jack from the Titanic by drawing naked women. And he had a few pages of his attempted drawings. Hey, maybe the kid's found his calling in art. We don't know. Was at my friend's place at around the age of 10 to 12 when my parent called me home randomly. I run in the front door and both my parents are sitting in the living room and immediately ask me to spell the word sex. I do, and then they tell me to send my brother over. My brother runs over and he'd be around 9 or 10 and doesn't come back. Turns out he searched for girls having sex but spelt it 6. These parents are over here trying to identify the digital handwriting. I found my stepdaughter's Musical.ly account. She had a bunch of poor attempts at sexy belly dancing to various Evanescence songs. She joined one of those Facebook groups. It was called Anything's an Adult Toy If You're Brave Enough. Pictures of my daughter, 11, posing quite harmlessly that went on to bum shots and short shorts. Someone pretending to be a 14-year-old girl asked her to do the shots for a modeling competition, and sent similar shots so she knew how to pose. She eventually stopped the conversation. The pics came through my iPad since the devices were linked. The police got involved and also CEOP. They originated from an account in South Africa, so Interpol took over the case and will probably never get an update. Instagram never even bothered to respond to my report. This happened to the 12-year-old daughter of a friend of mine recently. She also happened across it in much the same way and reported it to the police. They ended up having a huge investigation involved with the FBI, and the guy has now been sentenced to jail. My friend's daughter was one of the dozens he'd been soliciting. Keep an eye on your kids' social media, guys. You never know who's trying to contact them. I had a coworker bring her kid in during the summer so that she could run him to the local middle school for football practice when she took her break at 9. Since I was in training at the time, I was sitting with her at her desk and mine was not in use. To keep him occupied, I'd log into my computer and then she'd pull up YouTube so we could watch the Watch Me Whip song, because apparently kids will watch that for hours. Well, one day she goes over to check in on him and says in a confused voice, "Who the heck is Ed Gein?" So it turned out that it was still logged into my YouTube profile, where I had taken to watching documentaries about serial killers, and the kid had clicked on one of the recommended videos. Whoopsies. If she's really worried about what her kid's watching, then she should just create her own YouTube account. Personally, I have childlike parents. Weirdest thing so far was having to sit down and have a talk with my mother about how some things on Facebook are not real. My extended family lives in Houston, and during Hurricane Harvey, my mother was driving my elderly relatives to hysteria by emailing them horribly photoshopped pictures of Houston landmarks submerged under 50 feet of water, followed by, "It's a biblical flood! The world is ending! The news is lying to you! You're gonna die if you don't get in your car and drive out of town right now!" I talked to my stepdad and made him give me her password so I can shut down her account during the next natural disaster. Probably doing everyone in your family a favor. When I was 9 or 10, my buddy and I were on the family computer doing whatever 9 or 10-year-olds do. My friend told me to go to prettygirls.com. Seemed innocent enough, except it directed us to an adult site, and we immediately panicked and closed the browser. My mom really chewed us out when she found out. I tried to tell her we were just looking for pretty girls, but she wasn't having it. It was a long few weeks of computerless punishment. I don't know what it is, but I'm willing to bet it's something I disapprove of. My 15-year-old happily announces that he went viral because his comment amassed 1.5k likes on Reddit. "Well, what did you ask?" I asked him. "I forgot." "What's your Reddit name?" "I can't tell you." "Then why did you mention it?" With that comment having 3.5k likes itself, I'd like to think that the son saw it and got pretty jealous. That my 12-year-old son searched for pro study tips. No joke, my son, trying to study harder. Never in a million years and lives would I have expected this. When my twins were young, in elementary school, they were looking up The Simpsons and accidentally came across some adult Simpsons content. The computer was in the living room, so I heard them giggling and turned to see two guilty little faces. It was so hard not to laugh and so disturbing. What a conversation. The sight of Milhouse and Lisa is forever burned into my retinas. Looks like everything's coming up, Milhouse. When he was little, my brother once wanted to help us find a cool new purse to order for my mom's birthday. He did an image search for fun bags, and my parents had to answer a lot of questions. Not a parent, but my cousin one time got onto the computer when he was 11 or 12 or so and tried searching for indecent pictures of girls his own age. I was there when his stepdad checked through the browser history, and needless to say, he and my cousin had a chat about acceptable search terms. Yeah, that could have gotten really bad. They might be on a list now. Not social media, but I once caught both of my nieces playing an animated game online where the objective was to spank a cartoon butt with a paddle. Every time they'd swing the paddle at the butt, it would emit the sound of a woman moaning. They couldn't understand why the game was inappropriate, and were laughing hysterically while playing. Not a parent, but some of my students, 7th and 8th grade, asked to add me on Instagram. The worst username I've come across is BootyWarrior13. To be clear, I don't ever add anyone and my account is private. I never give them my handle because I don't want them to find me, but if they do, I decline the follow anyway. Usually the way I find out about their Instagram names is because they'll oftentimes want their peers to follow them, and they'll promote themselves by putting their username or handle on the board. I often joke though that I would add them on Facebook, to which I always get the reply, "Facebook is for old people," so that's fun. When I was 12, my dad found adult Dragon Ball Z content in my search history and proceeded to look through all of the pages while I hid in the bathroom pretending to take a poop. I remember him yelling my name and having to mentally prepare to deny everything. I'm scared to death to have kids and find their adult content searches. My girls are 8 and 10, and so far we've seen sucking boobies and Scooby-Doo sex. It's great. Parenting is great. Send help. Not my kid, but on Halloween I saw a post on my 17-year-old cousin's Snapchat that was a selfie caption verbatim, "Any girls trying to come over here and suck on this spooky thing and get festive with some pumpkin spice lattes?" I immediately facepalmed, then laughed my butt off for a solid 15 minutes. A friend from work's son goes to a fairly strict Catholic school. One day, I was walking out to my car and she was outside yelling on the phone and generally freaking out. I waited around. She usually has a lot of funny drama going on. She hangs up the phone, looks at me, starts hyperventilating, and then laughs hysterically. I was like, "Girl, what is going on?" She said her son's principal called her and her husband and that they need to come to the school immediately, that her son will fill her in on the rest. She continues to tell me that her son got caught looking at naked ladies on the internet, and the principal printed out his search history. He searched booby prawn and lady parts during class. She was yelling at her husband on the phone, telling him about the situation, and all he had to say was, "We should have taught him how to delete the history." I mean, the husband has the kid's best interests at heart, let's be honest here. When I was a little girl, I wanted to play some Barbie games or look at girl stuff, so I went to girls.com. Went downstairs to my mom crying in order to rat myself out. My little sister had something similar happen. She wanted to look at new bikes in order to decide what to ask Santa for. She went to dicks.com, hoping to see Dick's Sporting Goods. Instead, she saw a lot of schlong. Guess it runs in the family. Funny thing is, dicks.com actually takes you to Dick's Sporting Goods homepage now. Oh dear God. Reading this makes me realize how much my parents probably saw in my search history before I knew about incognito mode. Okay, it should be my parents telling this story, but here goes. So when I was a youngin' and just exploring the internet, I would usually go on Disney Channel to play games, but I wanted to find sites with fun girly stuff on them. So of course I just went to girls.com. Well, that took me right to an adult site, and my little self was like, whoops, and closed it right away. Well, apparently my dad had been looking at the browser history and noticed. So my dad's interrogating my two older brothers, asking them who was looking at adult content. And of course they said it wasn't them. My dad was persistent with trying to get them to confess until I come down the stairs and confess that it was me. My brothers had the biggest sigh of relief. You're a good sister. I know many a sister who would have counted that as a double win. Number 1 for not getting caught, and number 2 for getting your brothers in trouble. I found out my son is an urban explorer. He's 14 and I saw some of the videos of him and his friends sneaking into an old Air Force base and climbing on top of an air hangar. Yeah, just make sure he doesn't do anything really dangerous. One of my buddies was an urban explorer and I honestly don't know how he's not dead. He's climbed the top of spherical-shaped buildings, hopped on fast-moving trains, and other crazy stuff. This is another trend that I just find incredibly dangerous and stupid. Guys, please don't do stuff like this. It's not worth it just for some views. I was trying to figure out my niece's age, but it was too late to call my mom and ask. I remembered she had an Instagram account, and I thought that might help me figure out how old she is. I looked her up. She has the standard tween Insta bio about what activities she likes and a list of 15 of her BFFs, immediately followed by pondering, and I quote, "Mostly, why do people hate me?" She's 12. She's definitely 12. In my 9-year-old son's Google history, I found, "Do girls in England poo blood for a month? Do you live in England? Because it's weirder if you don't." My 15-year-old dropping acid on Snapchat. So, not just bad choices, but we're raising a kid stupid enough that not only created video evidence, which was beyond dumb, but to keep it under my story. I checked my 11-year-old son's search history to find a number of interesting questions. Do men grow vaginas? Will my penis disappear when I'm 18? Will I become a girl? How do I save my penis? I asked him about his search history a couple days later, and he told me that some kids in school told him that when boys turn 18, they turn into girls and lose their penis. Those bastards. I hopped on my nephew's tablet and proceeded to pull up the internet browser. Immediately, I was staring at a screenshot of an overweight, homeless-looking Santa knocking the cornhole out of a much younger Mrs. Claus. I immediately asked my nephew what kind of research he was doing with this Santa video, and his face turned fire engine red and he scurried back to his room. I'm sure he at least appreciates your discretion. This is kinda close. So I have a 2-year-old and a 7-year-old. They both love to watch kids' YouTube. Mostly these annoying toy unwrapping videos. I don't know. Anyhow, the other day I was working on my computer and they were playing Play-Doh. My 2-year-old comes into the room and tells my wife, while I'm listening, "Mommy, I made this!" My wife, "Oh, that's awesome!" 2-year-old, "Do you like it? Let me know in the comments." My wife and I died. I think this might kind of say something about what we're exposing our kids to in this day and age, but we're not going to get into that right now. I recently discovered my 10-year-old son had been looking for inappropriate content, but his computer has parental controls, so he was trying to look it up on his Roblox game. My daughter was 6 at the time. She was supposed to be asleep, and I go up to charge her Kindle and can't find it. I go to her room and quietly sneak in. I find her watching a video under a blanket. It's a popular mechanics video about how to build your own windmill. She had a mock model in the corner of the room she was working on. I definitely wasn't expecting that. This is definitely our most wholesome one so far. She's just enthusiastic about her project. My kids are too young for Twitter or Snapchat, but they love to watch YouTube. I started getting notifications a few months ago from people replying to my comments on conspiracy videos. I found out my son has a curiosity about flat earthers and doomsday preppers. That's kind of the scary side of everything. The kid doesn't know any better, he's just watching a video. And once you watch one, YouTube just starts to recommend more and more. They don't understand that the videos they're watching are conspiracy videos, and that the information in them might be less than accurate. When my son was 8, my wife was looking at his tablet and saw his comments on YouTube videos. Quite a few comments along the lines of, "You don't know what you're talking about, you," and then a series of randomly strung together cuss words that normally wouldn't be used together. He'd get called out by others for the random cussing and he'd say, "I'm only 8, I can do what I want," followed by random string of cuss words. When we brought it up, he knew they were bad words, but was repeating other vulgar comments he saw from other comment trolls, and didn't fully understand the harshness of his words. Now his YouTube habits are monitored much more closely, and he hasn't done anything like that since. Hopefully you got on top of that one early enough that he's not going to turn into another kid telling me how he's going to screw my girlfriend on Fortnite. My daughters are grown up now, but when one of them was around 14 or 15, I opened up her MySpace page. She was telling all these kids that her mother, that would be me, was a raging alcoholic. She was telling them how I was neglectful and how I didn't like her. At the time, I was pregnant with twins, working full-time, and my husband was gone with the Marines a lot. I'm not a drinker at all. Obviously, we had a long talk. She was feeling left out with all the excitement over the babies. Still though, it was pretty hurtful. It took me a long time to get over that. I wouldn't take that one too personally. Your daughter was just looking for some attention. It's honestly kind of understandable. My younger brother thought that when you entered more searches, it would delete the ones before at some point. So I look on his iPad one day and see a search for boobs or something like that. The search after that was cheese, then cheese, and then cheese, and so on. So many cheeses. Wouldn't you have to start at the top where it was just a whole bunch of cheeses and then see it be less and less cheeses as you go down? So you'd be scrolling down through all of the cheeses and then get to the bottom and see boobs and be like, I see what he was trying to do. My significant other was looking something up on YouTube at her sister's place, and the search bar autofill defaulted to sexy girls with nipples you can see through their tops, but spelt horribly. My significant other's niece is 6. Needless to say, her parents were mortified and doubled down on the parental controls. When Twitter became popular, my son was about 5 or 6 years old. He came up with a way to tweet vocally. Throughout the day, he would say things like, "Going to play with my trains, tweet tweet," and "bacon for breakfast, tweet tweet." I was sad when he stopped doing it. When I was 11, my mom asked me one day about some Google searches on the family computer, including sexy Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders. I blamed it on the babysitter and somehow convinced my brother to back me up. A couple years later, I was caught searching, "Can I see a picture of a girl in a bikini?" But I wasn't able to blame it on anyone this time around. I've since discovered the incognito tab. I think the incognito tab might be the secret hero behind this entire Reddit thread. My stepson is 7. I found a bunch of searches for Dominicans with no hands and feet, Dominicans with no heads, Dominican chests, Dominican torsos, Dominican legs, Dominicans in stores, Dominicans for sale, silver Dominicans, black Dominicans, white Dominicans. I was at a loss of how to bring it up to him. Thankfully, the next day we were in a clothing store and he asked me why Dominicans don't have hands or heads. Then why are there so many different colored Dominicans? I remembered the internet searches and became a little upset. I told him to be quiet because what he was saying could be taken offensively by Dominican people. He then got frustrated and loudly said, "Dominicans aren't people," as he pointed to a statue next to us. I breathed a sigh of relief and said, "Mannequins." I'm sure you still got a few looks in that store though. Not my kid, but my nephew. He was diligent upon receiving his phone to get Facebook installed along with an account. Last year, Halloween, I walked by him on his phone and glanced at a video of an explosion. Turns out, he liked a page of people blowing crap up. Not just any crap, but the actual crap that comes out of people. When confronted, he said he was shown the page from a friend who uploads videos there. You know, typically I would say your kid's gonna be friends with who he's gonna be friends with, but I think this is definitely one of those cases where you need to intervene. My son has autism, high functioning but still autistic. He's been mainstream for most of his schooling, and in 5th grade, one of the boys told the others how to search vagina and boobs on the computer. Well, my son in all of his autism glory was searching pagina, not vagina, and was only getting pictures of leaves. Poor kid. This was probably the early 2000s. Me and my buddy were off school for the summer and he would come hang out at my house. Occasionally, we'd look at adult content on the family computer. One day, my dad comes home from work and comes downstairs and says, "Hey, you guys missed the bus." I'm like, it's summer. There's no school. My dad responds, "The bang bus." Mother of God, we forgot to close the browser. I found a search for weight loss on my then 12-year-old search. Bothered the heck out of me as I've always tried to instill good body image, and she's by no means overweight. She was going through the baby fat stage. Started having conversations about the importance of being healthy and exercising, but to be comfortable with the body we have. She's since stretched out, but man, I looked for signs of starving and bulimia. Her mother was a bulimic, and I didn't want her to repeat that. We got my young daughter a tablet last Christmas. A couple days later, I went to look something up, and the search bar history had one entry. Is Santa Claus real? Well, that one kinda backfired, didn't it? When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, linked at the top of the description. And if you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Linked in the description as well. Either way, thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.